Chapter 378. Under the red light of the torch, the bloodstains on the footprints were like ink spots. Looking at that spot, Ning Kei's face turned pale, and he found that he had been shaken back to his original place by the inhibition at the entrance of the cave. The shoe on his left foot had been smashed into a cotton-like thing. He tore it off and struggled to sit up. Looking at the entrance of the cave that had been shrouded in darkness, his eyes could not help showing a trace of fear. Previously, when he violently crashed into the entrance of the cave, just at the moment when he was about to hit the inhibition, the thick and sticky chi of heaven and earth seemed to have sensed something and suddenly became violent. It turned into a terrifying ocean and directly rolled up his consciousness and body. Ning Kei had never been to the Kingdom of Song and had never seen the famous Sea of Storms. But he believed that even the real Sea of Storms was not as terrible as the ocean that he had fallen into. The ocean that was condensed by the thick chi of heaven and earth was shaking violently both on the surface and at the bottom. Thousands of huge whirlpools made it impossible for him to react or struggle, and he directly sank into the depths of the sea. The omnipresent pressure in the depths of the primordial chi ocean turned into countless extremely thin needles, piercing his clothes and skin, and then directly into his body. The seemingly strong great spirit in Ning Kei's body was like a candle in this violent ocean. It was instantly extinguished and scattered by those thin needles. The pain brought by those countless thin needles directly destroyed the protection of his sense of perception by his psyche power, which made him extremely painful. In the end, the violent ocean turned up a wave and easily knocked him back to the shore. He could feel that the wave was at most 1/10,000th of the power of the ocean, but it seemed to be more powerful than the fist of Xiaohou he had met on the shore of the Holland Sea in the wilderness. Hearing the noise, Sang Sang hurriedly ran out of the hut and saw Ning Kei falling on the ground by the light of the torch. She was shocked, and without thinking, she ran into the cliff cave. Ning Kei forcibly swallowed the blood that rushed to his throat and shouted, "Don't come in." Since childhood, they had lived a difficult life. In order to survive, they had long cultivated a tacit understanding between them. No matter what situation they encountered, Sang Sang would always unconditionally carry out Ning Kei's advice. This had become a kind of instinct. Therefore, after hearing this shout, Sang Sang did not come in no matter how worried she was. She leaned against the stone wall and looked at the pale Ning Quebec. She asked in a trembling voice, "How is it?" Ning Kei put his left foot on his right knee, closed his eyes, and began to meditate. The Great Spirit slowly circulated in his body. After confirming that there were no major problems with the Sea of Consciousness, Ocean of Snow, Ocean of Chi, and the cyclone in his lower abdomen, especially after confirming that the violent ocean did not destroy the Great Spirit in his body, he was slightly relieved and said in a low voice, "It's okay. I won't die." He had been injured too many times in his life, and Sang Sang had seen him get injured too many times. As long as he didn't die, the two of them wouldn't take it too seriously. As long as he didn't die, he would be fine. After the severely shaken sense of perception gradually calmed down, Ning Kei stood up and slowly walked to the entrance of the cliff cave. He stretched out his hand and pressed it gently in the air. His palms suddenly felt sluggish. It did not feel like water, but more like a bag filled with water, soft but unbreakable. Why didn't I sense the existence of the restriction when I walked in? He looked at the entrance of the cliff cave and thought about the magic of the restriction. No wonder his senior brothers and senior sisters were so shocked during the day. If he wanted to break out of the restriction, he was afraid that it would take a long time. After confirming that it would be a long process, he gradually calmed down and prepared for a long battle. After a moment of silence, he looked at Sang Sang and said with a smile, "Anyway, we have to eat first. Otherwise, we will starve to death before we die of old age. Let's go and see if there is anything to eat in the hut." He wanted to make Sang Sang feel more relaxed with this joke. But at this time, his face was pale, his expression was gloomy, his smile was forced, and there was blood on his chest. How could Sang Sang feel relaxed? There is rice, vegetables, and meat in the hut. I don't know when it was prepared. I have steamed the rice before, but the water in the tank can only last for 10 days at most. I don't know where to fetch water. Sang Sang reported the current situation to him, and then walked back to the hut to prepare dinner. The cliff was silent, the stars were shining in the night sky, and the clouds were faintly visible under the cliff. It seemed that this place was no longer in the human world, and it was lonely and desolate. Ninkei leaned against the stone wall at the entrance of the cave and looked at the night view in front of the cliff. He was a little depressed. Although he knew that the headmaster must have a reason to imprison him here, he still felt a little resentful and unwilling. He thought that he had done nothing wrong. Why was he imprisoned in this damn place like the Repent Cliff? He heard the sound of water on the right front. He looked over and saw Sang Sang squatting on the edge of the cliff, washing vegetables. The little girl probably had no concept of the cliff scenery or the concept of human insignificance. After washing vegetables, she naturally poured the water, mixed with sand in the basin, directly down the cliff. Perhaps only Sang Sang could ignore such a steep and terrifying precipice and focus on washing vegetables on the edge of the cliff. He wondered if the white clouds at the bottom of the cliff would feel the same when they were drenched by a basin of vegetable washing water as when they were drenched by a clear waterfall. Ning Kei quietly looked at Song Song's figure and thought that he was lucky that he would not hear any Bulsh Asterisk Tea Mountain songs, and he did not need to worry that she would splash him like the vegetable washing water. The food was ready. Although the ingredients were simple, the fragrance was still carried into the cliff cave by the mountain wind. Ning Kei used a stone to draw a deep line at the entrance of the cliff cave. While Sang Sang was cooking, he slowly felt it with his palm many times and finally determined the scope of triggering the inhibition. Sang Sang put a large bowl of hot food on the ground outside the cave. Then she took a piece of firewood and carefully pushed the bowl over the line according to Ning Kei's guidance. This inhibition really doesn't care about dead things. Otherwise, I would starve to death. Ning Kei held up the bowl of rice with vegetables and bacon and said happily. The two of them held the hot food and sat on the ground facing each other for dinner, just like they usually did in the old brushpen shop. The only difference was that they were separated by a table, but now they were separated by a line. The line was very short, but it divided the two worlds of the cave and the cliff plateau. Ning Kei was inside and Sang Sang was outside. Fortunately, they were together after all. The cliff faced the west and the terrain was extremely high. Without the cover of the tactical array of the academy and surrounded by green trees, the mountain wind was extremely strong. Especially at night, the cold wind whistled back and forth and the cliff plateau suddenly became cold. The food in Ning Kei's bowl was still warm, but the bowl in Song Song's hand had already become cold. She subconsciously shrank and wanted to lean to Ning Kei, but did not dare to cross the line. Looking at the little girl's shivering and cold appearance, Ning Kei thought of the fairy tale again. His mood and eyes became cold along with the temperature of the cliff plateau. He thought that Sang Sang had been suffering from coldness since she was a child and could not stand such torture. Thinking of this, his hatred for the headmaster of the academy suddenly came back, and he cursed in a low voice. Just when he was about to find a way to trick Sang Sang to go down the mountain, he suddenly heard footsteps on the stone path below the cliff plateau. Although he had been imprisoned for less than half a day, Ning Kei unexpectedly became happy when he heard the footsteps. He shouted, "Which brother is so kind to come to see me?" Suddenly, he understood how the monkey felt when he was trapped under the mountain. In the night, eldest brother clasped his hands behind his back, and second brother carried a load and walked up the cliff plateau. Eldest brother was very relaxed, but second brother's load was very heavy, as if he were carrying two small mountains. When he took out the things from a load, he found that it was all-inclusive, including water, rice, vegetables, firewood, meat, wine, books, chess, zither, and even two old hens. Sang Sang carried the two old hens back to the hut happily, thinking that she could make chicken soup for her young master. He just vomited so much blood and really needed nourishment. Ning Kei looked at the clucking old hens in her hands and was shocked. He sighed and said, "Senior brother, you are really generous. I don't know how you carried such a steep mountain. Why do you carry so many things? It seems that you really want me to live in this cave for several years." Although second brother was the most powerful person in the world, he was not a professional porter after all. It was a bit hard for him to carry the load all the way. He did not answer Ning Kei's sigh, but took out a handkerchief from his sleeve and carefully wiped the sweat on his neck. Then he straightened the crown on his head and looked at Ning Kei seriously. He said, "Younger brother, you have to wake up. This is definitely not a matter of 10 days or half a month." Ning Kei thought that second brother was really not a qualified visitation, and he did not even know how to say auspicious words. A bonfire was lit on the cliff plateau. Sang Sang was dozing off in a deerskin coat. This coat was sent by senior sister Yulian and was just the right size. The fire shone on eldest brother's old coat, as if it was a broken lantern, and second brother's high crown, as if it was a lonely peak with a single tree growing on it. Ning Kei sat in the cave and could not help laughing at this scene. He pointed at second brother's high crown and said, "It really looks like a piece of firewood." Second brother asked, "What's so funny? Why is it funny?" "I won't tell you," Ning Kei said with a smile. "Second brother, in fact, everyone thinks the high crown on your head is very funny. But no one told you because they were afraid that you would be angry." Second brother frowned slightly and said unhappily, "Don't talk nonsense. If you are afraid that I will be angry, why do you dare to tell me now?" Ning Kei pointed at the line in front of him and laughed. He said, "Because I can't get out of the cave and you can't get in either. I thought for a long time and finally came up with this benefit. How can I not use it?" Eldest brother looked at the two and smiled without saying anything. He thought that Junimo would probably not continue to be so boring after meeting such a person like youngest brother. The bonfire crackled. Second brother brewed tea and poured 4 cups. The first cup was sent to eldest brother respectfully, and the second cup was placed in front of Sang Sang. Then he flicked his index finger, and the third cup of tea was thrown into the cave. The black teacup fell in front of Ning Kei and stopped after spinning 3 times. Not a single drop of tea spilled out. Second brother attached great importance to etiquette and rules, so he was particular about the order of serving tea. He served the elder or the virtuous first, and then the young. As for the third cup, he gave it to Ning Kei because he was in prison. Ning Kei thanked him and raised the cup to his nose to sniff it. He did not drink it and suddenly asked in a low voice, "If I really can't get out, then I really can't get out?" Sang Sang is washing vegetables in the precipice. If you want to talk about whether Jiang Yi has any aesthetic pursuit, if you don't think this word is too pretentious, this picture is my favorite. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 379. There were 2. I really can't get out in this sentence. The former referred to his ability, and the latter referred to reality. Ning Kei was thinking and worrying at this moment. The headmaster of the academy had sent him to the back cliff for closed-door training, which made him depressed and even a little desperate. However, he had always thought that the academy would let him out if he was really at his wit's end. He could not just watch his hair turn white overnight and die in this cave of old age. However, in less than a day, he was meditating in the Cloud Cliff Cave. He increasingly felt that his judgment was not trustworthy. Perhaps this cliff cave was really an endless abyss. Listening to his question, the 2 beside the bonfire fell into silence. After a long time, second brother shook his head and eldest brother let out a slight sigh. The mountain wind whistled, and the flamboyant firewood on the cliff plateau gradually weakened. Ning Kei held the hot tea and looked at the flame. He suddenly felt a little cold and regretted following the headmaster of the academy to the back cliff instead of running away with Sang Sang. The cold and the fear of being imprisoned for life finally made the anger that he had accumulated for half a day burst out. He shouted, "It's the first day I see my student, and he locks him up in the cave and prepares to lock him up for life. What kind of logic is this? I didn't do anything wrong, nor did I violate the academy's rules. Why did he do this? Who does he think he is? The emperor or the prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City? Didn't they say that the law of the Tang Empire is the most important? He set up a private prison to imprison innocent people. Does that count as violating the law of the Tang Empire? I'm going to sue him. I'm going to go out and sue him." The two senior brothers beside the bonfire knew that he was just venting, so they ignored him. Ninkei gradually calmed down and laughed at himself. He thought that the headmaster of the academy was not the emperor, but he was more honorable than the emperor. His words were more effective than the law of the Tang Empire. The bonfire shone around the entrance of the cliff cave. Eldest brother looked at the bloodstains on the front of Meng Qi's robe and knew that Meng Qi had tried to escape as soon as he entered the cliff cave, just as everyone had expected. He advised, "It's not easy to do isolated meditation in the cliff cave. It took youngest uncle 3 years to figure out. You need to be patient." During the day in the hut on the other side of the mountain, Ninkei already knew that youngest uncle had been imprisoned in the cliff cave. But now he knew that even youngest uncle, who was once the most powerful person in the world, had to spend a whole 3 years to escape. His body could not help but become colder. No matter how confident he was, he did not dare to hope that he could be compared to little uncle. Little uncle had used 3 years back then, so how long would it take for him to escape? 10 years or a lifetime? He lowered his head and said, "What if we can't get out? It's meaningless for anyone to imprison me in the cliff cave for a lifetime. It's the most meaningless thing to realize that it's meaningless when I'm old." Youngest uncle once said that fate itself is a very cruel guy. Before making sure that you can take on the mission, it will do everything it can to break every bone in you, strip every bit of your flesh and blood, and let you suffer the most extreme pain in the world. Only in this way can your willpower and mind be strong enough to be chosen by fate. Second brother looked at him and said, "Only a real desperate situation can inspire true courage. So this cliff cave must be a place of death for you. Only in this way can you understand that thing and really deceive heaven and earth. When youngest brother and Long Qing climbed the mountain, I saw your mind and will. I know that you have potential and it's possible. So even if this thing is meaningless to the world, it is meaningful to you." Ninkei raised his head and looked at his senior brother by the bonfire. He thought of the words deceive heaven and earth, and then thought of how youngest uncle was also imprisoned in the cliff cave for 3 years. Finally, he confirmed his guess. The reason why the headmaster of academy asked him to seclude himself was indeed related to joining the devil. But why did youngest uncle practice Howren's sword and join the devil? Why did the headmaster of academy lock him in the cave? Ninkei suddenly wanted to know what happened at that time, because he seemed to be on the same path as youngest uncle. So he needed to learn and think about it. Eldest brother looked at Sang Sang, who was sleeping by the bonfire. After a moment of hesitation, he smiled and said slowly, "I talk too slowly. Let Junimo tell you." Second brother said, "We have all been to the precipice, but we have never entered this cliff cave. In all the years of the academy, only youngest uncle was imprisoned here for 3 years." He looked at Ninkei in the cave and said, "Youngest brother, you have seen the first exploration of Howren's sword in the old library. Later, I taught you the Great Spirit by the Mirror Lake. Now you have inherited youngest uncle's breath in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine and learned the Great Spirit. Naturally, you understand that Howren's sword and Great Spirit are two different things." At this point, it was meaningless for Ninkei to hide the fact that he joined the devil, especially in front of his two senior brothers. After a moment of silence, he said, "The Great Spirit absorbs the aura of heaven and earth into the body. According to the doctrine of Hao-Ian Taoism, learning the Great Spirit is equal to joining the devil." Obviously, the two people by the bonfire had known about this for a long time. They did not show any surprise on their faces. Second brother recalled the past and praised. Howren's sword is a swordsmanship created by the predecessors of the academy. When it is cultivated to the highest level, the flying sword can pierce through the clouds in the ninth heaven. It is not weaker than Liu Bai's day swordsmanship. Youngest uncle was so talented that he easily cultivated the Howren sword to such an extreme state. However, he was not complacent at all. He also comprehended the Great Spirit with the Howren sword style. Youngest uncle was only 16 years old at that time. Ninkei had long been used to the geniuses in the back of the mountain of the academy. Moreover, youngest uncle was second brother's idol. He had also felt the supreme power of the sword style left by youngest uncle in the wilderness. Therefore, he was not too shocked when he heard that youngest uncle was in the same state as Liu Bai, the strongest man in the world, at the age of 16. However, he still could not help but feel a little dizzy when he thought that the Great Spirit was created by youngest uncle. Now you and I both know that youngest uncle's Great Spirit is essentially in conflict with the philosophy of Haotian Taoism. In other words, is the cultivation method of the devil's doctrine. Therefore, when the headmaster found out about this, he directly locked youngest uncle in this cliff cave. It is said that the headmaster also said the same words to youngest uncle at that time. Ning Ke asked, "Which words?" "You can come out when you've figured it out." Ning Ke was speechless. Second brother continued, "It took youngest uncle a whole 3 years to understand some things. He walked out of the cliff cave, rode a little black donkey out of the academy, and entered Chang'an City. From then on, he entered the human realm. After that, he killed all the powerhouses in the world with a cyan steel sword in his hand. He even went to the wilderness to destroy the devil's doctrine. In these countless battles, youngest uncle's Haoran sword was unparalleled, but Haotian Taoism and the Buddhism sect did not suspect anything." He looked at Ning Ke and said, "Because youngest uncle understood some things in the cliff cave. Ning Ke also understood some things." After a moment of silence, second brother continued, "After youngest uncle destroyed the devil's doctrine with his sword, he was disheartened by something and rode back to the academy on the little black donkey. He pondered for a night in the sword forest at the front of the mountain, and then went to the back of the mountain to talk with the headmaster for 3 days. Then he came to the cliff and built this hut, which is the one in front of you. After youngest uncle destroyed the devil's doctrine, he was recognized as the strongest person in the world. Many unworldly sublime beings wanted to challenge him. At that time, there were only the headmaster, youngest uncle, me, and the scholar in the back of the mountain of the academy. Without the big tactical array in the cloud abyss, anyone could challenge him. It was more troublesome than what you encountered in Chang'an City a few days ago. Eldest brother thought of the sword Qi and Buddha's light between the precipices at the back of the cliff and smiled slightly. Youngest uncle did not feel bored. He meditated and pondered in the hut by the cliff. When he was depressed, a real powerhouse would come to him to test his sword, so he killed him with a sword. Now that I think about it, Jishou Abbey and Xiankong Temple have been silent these years. I'm afraid that too many people died in youngest uncle's hands." Second brother looked back at the precipice not far away and thought of the battles that had taken place here in the past. He thought of the experts at the peak of the 5 realms from the unknown place who had fallen under youngest uncle's sword one after another. They suffered heavy casualties and fell off the cliff, and no one remembered their names. He felt proud and regretful. Back then, those people who came to these cliffs and precipices knew that the youngest uncle was invincible, but they still came one after another. They were all cultivators who were truly worthy of respect. That kind of pride that cultivators should have was innately not something that the mediocre and fearful of death in the cultivation world today could compare to. Second brother was also very proud. He had always wanted to follow in youngest uncle's footsteps. He also wanted to recreate the scene where people on the cliff burned their lives into fireworks for dignity and pride. It was a pity that those people were all dead. How many people in the world were worthy of respect and were worthy of fighting? Those unworldly sublime beings either died or escaped with injuries. No one dared to challenge the academy again. The cliff returned to peace. Then one day, youngest uncle suddenly left the hut and never came back. Second brother finished telling the story of that year. Ning Ke was silent for a long time. He heard from Yi Hong Yu in the wilderness that youngest uncle was finally killed by heaven's punishment. It was probably because of this that the headmaster of the academy went to West Hill to cut down a mountain of peach blossoms. Haotian Taoism did not want to mention this again. The reputation of the world's most powerful person gradually disappeared. Why did youngest uncle receive heaven's punishment? Because the Great Spirit did not tolerate Haotian, and he was already the world's most powerful person, so he provoked Haotian's anger? Youngest uncle had pondered for many years in the thatched cottage in the cliff cave and finally embarked on the path of destruction. How could he understand this matter? The headmaster imprisoned you in the cliff cave, which is equivalent to treating you as youngest uncle in the past. There's a lot of hidden expectations. If you can't even get through this first obstacle, how can you go on in the future? Eldest brother looked at him and said with a smile, "Youngest brother, your state is much lower than that of youngest uncle in the past. Naturally, there will not be a problem immediately. However, it does not prevent you from going out with a black umbrella in advance. Because your state is still low, it is easier to solve that problem than youngest uncle in the past. So don't always think that you are not as good as youngest uncle. You still have hope." Ninkei looked at the night sky outside the cliff cave. Ever since he returned to Chong and from the wilderness, he had been thinking about that problem. How could he prevent the essence of the Great Spirit from being discovered by others? In the battle with Monk Wan Hai, he had already made some attempts. However, those methods were superficial and could not fundamentally solve the problem. If he wanted to solve the problem fundamentally, he had to learn to tell a big lie to deceive everyone in the world, even the world. This is the first chapter. I have written some parts of the second chapter. It should be finished before 8:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 380. Back then, youngest uncle had secluded himself in the cliff cave and the hut twice. For the first time, he perfectly solved the problem of traveling in the world with the Great Spirit in 3 years. However, when he became the most powerful person in the world and no longer needed to deceive the world, he had to face a more troublesome situation. So he secluded himself again and thought hard. After a long time, he finally found that he could not deceive himself. So he left the academy and went to the sky. Then he disappeared without a trace. Ninkei looked at the night sky outside the cliff plateau and the stars on the dark curtain. For the first time, he tried to look behind the stars and touch the deep curtain. In the world, no one dared to disrespect the academy except for Haotian Taoism. The academy was so powerful that it was arrogant and arrogant. Youngest uncle was still a legend in the back of the mountain. Since the headmaster could take in Tang Xiaotang, a girl from the Devil's Doctrine, it meant that the academy did not discriminate against the Devil's Doctrine. So why did the headmaster imprison youngest uncle and him today? He looked at the night sky and murmured in his heart, "Is he trying to deceive your eyes? But you are the divine light. How can you have eyes?" Ninkei's mind was a bit confused. He suddenly felt a little scared and understood that he was too far away from the real origin of the world. He was not qualified to think about these things. Once he thought about it, the stars in the night sky seemed to laugh. He had to solve the problem in front of him, the problem of how to leave this cliff cave. Youngest uncle had solved this problem perfectly in the past. Now it was his turn. In Chong, and at night, those who were qualified or needed to know received the message from the academy. They knew 2 things. The first was that the headmaster had finally ended his 2-year journey and returned to the academy. The second was that Ninkei, Mr. 13 on the 2nd floor of the academy, was ordered by the headmaster to cultivate in seclusion. Although Zhang Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library, was a first-class official, he was not qualified to receive the message from the academy. However, he had recently found his long-lost daughter. Therefore, the Grand Secretary's mansion was the first place to know about these 2 things besides the Imperial City. Cultivate in seclusion? How long will it take? Zhang Jing frowned and asked. Eunuch Lin shook his head and said hesitantly, 1 or 2 months? Who can say for sure? The concept of those eccentric people on the 2nd floor of the academy is probably different from ours. Zhang Jing asked confusedly. According to the laws of the Tang Empire and the rules of the palace, the Ministry of Rites has always been in charge of the affairs of the academy, especially the 2nd floor of the academy. Except for the people in the palace and the military ministry, no one else knows about it. Why did His Majesty ask you to tell me about it? Eunuch Lin smiled bitterly and said, "Isn't it all because of the young lady who just returned from your state? I heard that the principal personally ordered her to take care of Mr. 13. Since Mr. 13 is going into secluded cultivation, your young lady will probably have to accompany him. Don't ask me when she'll be back. I really don't know." Hearing this, Mrs. Zung panicked. Before the two senior brothers left the cliff cave, they said something to Ning Quebec. He knew that the headmaster and the academy wouldn't just leave him in the cave and let him fend for himself. Feeling a little relieved, he found a corner where the wind couldn't blow, spread his bedding, and fell into a deep sleep. When he woke up and opened his eyes, he found that the sky was still dark. He walked to the entrance of the cave and looked out. There was no wind or rain. The distant Chang and city was shrouded in the morning light, which was very beautiful. Only then did he realize that the cliff faced the west. He could see more of the sunset from the cave, but it was much more difficult to get close to the morning light than the people under the sea of clouds. There were many things on the pole that second brother carried, including many things from the old brush pen shop. No one knew if it was Chin Pippi or another senior brother or sister who went to Chang and city to fetch them. Before going to bed, Sang Sang checked everything. The big black umbrella, the primordial 13 arrows, the box of banknotes, and even the toothbrush and towel were all there. Sang Sang passed water, toothbrush, and towel into the cave. Ning Ke washed up hastily and ate breakfast. He immediately felt refreshed. Suddenly, he thought of a problem and couldn't help but frown. "There's a toilet." Sang Sang knew what he was worried about from his expression. Ning Ke said helplessly, "It will stink." Sang Sang said, "Just wash it frequently." Ning Ke looked at the sea of clouds between the cliffs and shook his head. He sighed and said, "It's a pity that these clouds will be ruined. But youngest uncle also dirted in the past, so it's not a big deal even if there are two more of us." After the refreshing feeling, Ning Ke pinched his nose and was ready to carry the toilet. Sang Sang looked at him and couldn't help laughing. She said, "Didn't you do these things by yourself when you were young? It's only been a few years, and you're already disgusted with the smell." Ning Ke said seriously, "Our identities are different now, so we naturally feel different. Speaking of which, there's something serious that I've always forgotten to discuss with you." Sang Sang asked, "What is it?" Ning Ke said, "I'm thinking if I should buy a maid." Sang Sang pointed at herself and asked confusedly, "Am I not a maid?" Ning Ke said with a smile, "Although you're still my little handmaiden, you're the daughter of a first-rank grand secretary. It's okay to make the bed and fold the quilt, but how can I let you continue to do the heavy work? I'm not used to being served by others." Sang Sang said, "Thinking that there will be one more person in the old brush pen shop, I feel a little awkward." Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "It's indeed a little awkward." Sang Sang smiled and shook her head. She walked into the cave with a basin of water for him to wash his hands. Then she walked to the corner to carry the toilet, walked back to the cliff, and poured it into the flowing clouds. After washing his hands, Ning Ke pulled down a dry towel hanging on the cave wall and wiped his hands. He looked at her and reminded her, "Put it far away. Although it's your own smell, it's still disgusting." Sang Sang agreed. Ning Ke suddenly froze while wiping his hands. He looked at her figure and felt a little dizzy. He suddenly came to his senses and shouted in shock, "How did you come in?" Sang Sang turned back in shock and found that she had walked into the cliff cave, and she had come in once when she carried the toilet. She couldn't help but let out a soft cry and quickly ran out. After a while, she held the cave wall and carefully looked inside. She asked, "Are you all right?" Ning Ke was a little confused and said, "I'm fine. The question is, are you all right?" Sang Sang looked down at herself and patted her chest to make sure that she was not hurt and did not vomit blood like Ning Quebec. She said, "I seem to be fine. Do you want to try again?" Ning Ke walked to the entrance of the cliff cave and stood in the line drawn yesterday. He stretched out his hand and pressed it in the air. He was a little disappointed to find that his palm still felt the stagnant touch. "I can't get out." He shook his head and understood what was going on. The inhibition at the entrance of the cliff cave was specially set by the headmaster to imprison youngest uncle. It was aimed at the great spirit in youngest uncle's body. The simple aura that the headmaster attached to the entrance of the cliff cave would suddenly activate once it sensed the existence of the great spirit. The stronger the great spirit was, the more powerful the inhibition would be. He and youngest uncle both had the Great Spirit in their bodies. If they wanted to get out of the cliff cave, they had to cultivate the Great Spirit to be strong enough to defeat the aura left by the headmaster and destroy the sea of chi of heaven and earth at the entrance of the cliff cave. Or they had to figure out how to integrate the Great Spirit in their bodies with the chi of heaven and earth in nature so that they could be in harmony. Only then could they not disturb the sea of chi at the entrance of the cliff cave. There was one last way, and that was to destroy the Great Spirit in their bodies. Ninkei looked at the entrance of the cliff cave and felt a lot of emotions. The inhibition set by the headmaster was very simple. In essence, it was the aura that he left here. However, it set endless problems for the person who broke the inhibition. There were many difficult questions in the world. The difficulty lay in finding the only answer under countless complicated clues. The question left by the headmaster was very difficult, but it had a few answers. It was very difficult to choose. If one did not have the confidence to cultivate the Great Spirit to the extent of defeating the headmaster, would he be willing to destroy the powerful and precious Great Spirit in his body? Time would pass in the hesitation and struggle of the person who solved the question. As time went by day, it would become more and more difficult to make a choice. It would even become a terrible torture. If one finally decided to give up after being imprisoned in the cliff cave for many years, he would look back on the first night he entered the cave. He would definitely regret why he did not destroy the Great Spirit in his body at that time. He had persisted for so many years. Wasn't it the most stupid thing to do? Would he be willing to give up in the face of such pain? It was obvious that youngest uncle did not choose the last method, because when he left the academy and entered the human realm, he still had the Great Spirit. Moreover, a peerless figure like youngest uncle would definitely understand the true intention of the headmaster's question earlier than Ning Quebec. With his temperament and willpower, if he wanted to give up, he would definitely do so without any hesitation or wasting 3 years. Ninkei did not think of the possibility that youngest uncle could directly break the inhibition set by the headmaster with the Great Spirit. There was no reason to support his judgment. He just felt that this scene was not beautiful. Youngest uncle should have chosen the second method. 3 months. Ninkei looked at Sang Sang, who still did not dare to walk back into the cliff cave, and repeated, 3 months. I'm not as strong as youngest uncle. I need 3 months to think about whether to use the last method or not. If I can't bear to destroy my Great Spirit, you know what to do. Sang Sang asked nervously, You want to use that method? I have never used it. Ninkei said, I need your help. After a moment of silence, Sang Sang said, Are you sure? Ninkei said, I am sure. A cyan dress appeared between the cliffs. It was blown by the mountain wind, and a petite figure could be vaguely seen. Today, the first person to visit Ninkei was third sister, Yulian. Yulian walked to the cliff platform and sat down in front of the line at the entrance of the cave. She took out an old book from her sleeve and handed it to Ning Quebec. She looked at him and said softly, If you want to solve the problem, there is only one way. The cover of the old book was written with the words, Origin of the Aura of Heaven and Earth. Ninkei took a look at the old book in his hand and asked seriously, Which method? Yulian tucked her hair behind her ears and said, To learn. This is the second chapter. The third chapter will be very late. Try to finish it before 11 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 381. Yulian was the first person Ning Kei knew from the back mountain of the academy. However, she was a female professor at that time, while he was just an ordinary student who went to the old library every day. In those memorable days, Ning Kei and she sat by the east and west windows respectively. One of them was writing regular script, while the other held a book and meditated. They seldom talked and occasionally nodded to each other. Later in the sword forest, they talked a few words. Later, before Ning Kei left the academy for the wilderness, she gave him something. Apart from that, there was no more communication. After all, they had a period of time in the old library from the time when flowers bloomed to the time when cicadas sang. So they should be able to get along peacefully. However, Ninkei really did not know how to face this third sister. Among the disciples of the back mountain of the academy, Yulian was a very special one. She was ranked only after eldest brother and second brother. However, her state of cultivation was ordinary. She was gentle and quiet, but did not like to communicate with others. It seemed that she was not interested in anything in the world and rarely appeared in front of people. When people saw her, it seemed that she was always writing hairpin-style, small regular script. She was writing regular script in the old library, when there was a gathering, and when the headmaster of the academy opened the gate of the back mountain of the academy to imprison Ninkei, she was still writing regular script in the drafty thatch cottage. When Ninkei and Prince Longqing climbed the mountain, everyone gathered at the peak and talked about it. At that moment, she stood alone in the flowers by the cliff, smiling and saying nothing. For Ninkei, the biggest difficulty in getting along with third sister was that he did not know what attitude he should use to get along with her. He could not tell how old she was. She was quiet, elegant, and even a little cold. She wore a loose academy uniform and had a calm expression on her face, which gave her a very calm temperament. Her delicate and somewhat childish face and small body made people mistake her for a young girl when they saw her. "Senior sister, what book is this?" "This is a forbidden book." Hearing Yu Lian's gentle voice, Ninkei raised his head in surprise. This book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth was written by a grand cultivator hundreds of years ago. It once caused a great stir in the cultivation world. Because it went against the teachings of Hao Yan, it was listed as a forbidden book by the West Hill Divine Palace and was forbidden to appear in the world. The last time this book appeared was in a large family in the Kingdom of Song. That family was exterminated because they secretly kept this book. Ninkei's hand, which was holding the old book, slightly stiffened. He did not expect this book to have such an amazing origin. He could not understand it and asked, "Then why does the Academy have this book?" Yulian smiled and said, "Of course, the Academy can't lack books." Ninkei thought of the huge cave next to the scholar's hut and shrugged his shoulders. "Senior sister, what if I can't understand this book?" Yulian said, "According to the headmaster's order, I'll come to the cliff cave every 10 days. Study this book well during these 10 days. Write down any questions you have and ask me later." Only then did Ninkei realize that it was the headmaster's arrangement. Yulian did not say anything else. She only told him to study hard and went down the mountain. For the rest of the day, Ninkei had been reading and studying except for eating. The more he read, the more he understood why the West Hill Divine Palace had listed this book as a banned book. Because the beginning of the book, Origin of Aura of Heaven and Earth, clearly stated the details and the final argument. Since the beginning of the world, all things were born, and the sun was born in the sky, giving all things a shape, state, and essence. All things died and were renewed, and the essence in the body was scattered between heaven and earth. It was the aura of heaven and earth that cultivators could perceive today, which was the so-called qi of heaven and earth. Ninkei did not study the origin of this world, but he felt that this argument was quite novel and interesting. Perhaps it was because this argument was too novel that it was strictly banned by the West Hill Divine Palace. Because this argument believed that the aura of heaven and earth came from all things themselves and was not given by Hao Yan, as mentioned in the doctrine of Hao Yan. If people really believed this argument, how could Hao Yan Taoism maintain the cultivator's reverence for Hao Yan? After entering the academy, Ninkei had read many classics on cultivation in the old library. The first one he read was about the qi of heaven and earth. However, the origin of qi of heaven and earth in his hand was much more profound and obscure. Therefore, even though he was very interested, he still read very slowly. From sunrise to sunset, he had been sitting at the entrance of the cave, reading this forbidden book in silence. His mind was immersed in the wisdom of the predecessors, and he had a new understanding of the composition of this world, especially the production, quantity, and operation of the aura of heaven and earth. He did not know how this book could help him solve the problem left by the headmaster of the academy. and how to complete his seclusion. But since the headmaster of the academy had asked him to read this book, he would continue reading it. Because he believed that the headmaster of the academy did not trap him in the cliff cave just to make him a professor of the academy. Ning-Kei was reading in the cliff cave, and Sang-Sang was watching him reading outside the cliff cave. After a long time, he was still interested. Every time he understood a profound explanation, his face would show a happy expression. Sang-Sang, on the other hand, was bored. Fortunately, she had been used to boredom over the years, so she washed her hair. The night gradually shrouded Chang and city, the wilderness, the drifting clouds, and the cliff. After Sang-Sang finished cooking, Ning-Kei ate a few mouthfuls and began to read again. Sang-Sang saw the flickering light of the torch. She thought for a while and walked into the hut. After searching for a long time, she found an oil lamp and passed it into the cave. Under the dim light of the oil lamp, Ning-Kei held the book and continued to read it attentively. The experience of his previous life made him somewhat resistant to learning knowledge. However, it was also the experience of his previous life that told him that if he wanted to learn the knowledge in the book as soon as possible and be able to use it, he had to maintain absolute concentration. Ning-Kei read until late at night, when the oil in the lamp was about to run out. He did not rush to sleep, but closed his eyes to review today's reading in his mind. Because he slept too late, Ning-Kei was still very tired when he was awakened by the sound of bellows outside the cliff cave the next morning. He could not help but feel annoyed and wondered where the sound came from. He rubbed his eyes, put on a thin coat, and walked to the entrance of the cliff cave. He looked at the fat man who was supporting his waist and looking at the scenery outside the cliff, panting and pretending to be pretentious. His expression suddenly changed. The sound that woke him up was Chin-Pipi's panting when he climbed the stone path. However, he did not expect that a person's panting could be as loud as thunder. "Do you have to be so tired?" he said helplessly. Hearing his voice, Chin-Pipi did not turn around. He held his round waist and looked at the precipice in front of him, the drifting clouds between the cliffs, and Chang, and city in the distance under the morning light. He panted and said in a hoarse voice like a scholar, "Oh, I once climbed to the top to see stop." Ning-Kei stopped his sigh by driving a donkey. Chin-Pipi turned to look at him and shook his head repeatedly. He criticized, "That's not elegant. Although youngest uncle did ride a donkey back then, why do such an indecent thing in such a wonderful view?" Ning-Kei looked at him and said angrily, "You know I'm not in a good mood. Don't pollute my ears with those sour words. Be careful, or I'll kick you down the mountain." Chin-Pipi thought of the precipice that was so close to him when he went up the mountain, and his legs became weak again. He patted his chest with lingering fear and said, "This precipice is too steep. I almost lost my life when I climbed up. Thinking that you're going to stay here for 8 to 10 years, I really can't feel good." Ning-Kei sneered and said, "That's because you're too fat." This sentence hit the nail on the head. Chin-Pipi did not know how to fight back. He looked at the cliff cave, and suddenly his eyes brightened. He exclaimed, "So this is where youngest uncle used to live. I didn't visit it because of the steep mountain road. Today is the first time I see it. This cliff cave is not ordinary. It's very historic. It's a great honor to live in it. I envy you." A stone whizzed through the air from the cave and almost hit Chin-Pipi's foot. It bounced a few times on the cliff platform and fell into the sea of clouds on the cliff, never to be found again. Chin-Pipi was shocked. He pointed at the cliff cave and shouted, "You're going to kill me." Ning-Kei continued to search in the cave for a long time, but he couldn't find a second stone. He angrily rushed to the entrance of the cave and shouted, "You shameless thing! Why don't you live in such a historic cave? I'll give all the honor to you. Come in, come in." Chin-Pipi sneered and said, "Come out if you can." Ning-Kei said shamelessly, "Come in if you can." Sang-Sang had been standing beside the cliff cave and watching the senior brother and junior brother quarreling. She finally couldn't help saying, "I think you're both very capable." Ning-Kei and Chin-Pipi looked at her at the same time. Chin-Pipi hesitated for a moment and asked seriously, "Are you telling the truth or sarcasm?" Sang-Sang looked at him and said nothing. Chin-Pipi had always thought that he was a peerless genius. However, he had been to the old brush pen shop several times and played chess with Sang Sang. At least in front of Sang Sang, he didn't have such confidence anymore. Correspondingly, he valued Song Song's evaluation or praise of him very much. Song Song's silence hurt his self-esteem to a certain extent. He looked at Ning Kei in the cliff cave and said mockingly, "Only a monkey locked in an iron cage would throw stones at people because it's too boring. I forgive you." Ning Kei said, "Whatever you say. Hit me if you can." Chun Pippi took something out of his arms and threw it directly into the cave. It happened so suddenly that Ning Kei was almost hit in the face. Fortunately, his body reacted quickly. He turned sideways and reached out his right hand to catch the thing. It was a wrinkled book. There was no name on the cover, but there were many sweat stains. Ning Kei thought that the sweat stains might be from the fat man and felt a little disgusted. "What book is this?" He resisted the nausea and looked at Chun Pippi outside the cave. Chun Pippi said, "No name." "Then what does this book talk about?" "The no-boundary spirit of the academy." Ning Kei didn't understand and asked, "What's that?" Chun Pippi thought that he was teasing him again and said angrily, "This book talks about the no-boundary spirit of the academy. If you don't understand it, I'll tell the teacher. I'm tired, but there's still the 4th chapter. But it might not be finished until 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. Let's read it tomorrow." Good. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 382. The No-Boundary Spirit of the Academy. Ning Kei looked at the wrinkled book in his hand and naturally thought of the opening day of the 2nd floor of the academy last spring. He turned around and saw the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," on the stone when he climbed down the mountain with difficulty. He could not help frowning and thinking for a long time. A few days ago, he learned from second brother that Prince Long Qing saw the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," which was actually a comment made by the headmaster of the academy. So the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," were undoubtedly left by the headmaster of the academy for him, or a warning to his life. What did the words, "A gentleman is not a tool," on the stone mean? What is the connection between this old book and the word "not a tool"? Did the headmaster of the academy foresee that he needed to learn the no-boundary spirit of the academy in advance? Ning Kei looked out of the cave and asked, "If there is a problem in the book, how can I solve it?" Chun Pippi said, "I will go up the mountain every 10 days. If there is anything you don't understand," Ning Kei just realized that this was the curriculum arrangement of the headmaster of the academy for him, just like third sister Yulian. He shook his head and said, "You are not third sister, so don't be too optimistic. You have to come up the mountain every day, or Sang Sang, and I'll be bored to death." Chun Pippi said sarcastically, "You want me to come up the mountain with you? Are you begging me? You were so fierce to me before. What can you do to me if I go down the mountain now?" Ning Kei replied, "Then get out of the mountain quickly." Chun Pippi was really obedient. He turned around and was ready to go down the cliff platform. Suddenly, he stopped and turned to look at Ning Kei in the cave. He was silent for a long time. Ning Kei looked at him with a slightly strange expression. Chun Pippi suddenly said, "I heard that the headmaster prepared 3 books for you to read. If you can't come out after reading all 3 books, then you may not come out in this life." Ning Kei slightly frowned and asked, "What's the 3rd book?" Chun Pippi shook his head and said, "No one knows." After a moment of silence, Ning Kei suddenly laughed and said, "If one day it is confirmed that I can't get out, I will have to trouble you to find me a spoon." Chun Pippi was slightly surprised and asked, "What do you need a spoon for?" Ning Kei pointed to the depths of the dark cliff cave behind him and said, "Give me a spoon, and I can dig a long tunnel directly through the academy's cliff, mirror lake and mist, and return to the human world." Chun Pippi felt that there was something wrong with his brain and said sympathetically, "Don't put too much pressure on yourself." Ning Kei knew that he didn't understand what kind of spirit and attitude he was trying to express, but it was enough for him to understand. He lowered his head and began to read the book. Chun Pippi heaved a sigh and left the cliff plateau slowly and smoothly. The metaphysical was known as the Tao, and the metaphysical was known as the tool. Artifact. The great Tao was not a weapon. It was the Tao of heaven. It did not care about its specific form. A gentleman is not a tool, which means that people should not rigidly adhere to some fixed rules. The two words "not a tool" meant that they held a condescending, arrogant, and undisciplined attitude towards the rules. Note, there are some differences in the original meaning of the word. I chose this one because of the need of the story. Ninkei opened the old book with no words on the cover, and was soon attracted by the content of the book, and his eyes could no longer leave the paper. For the rest of the day and night, apart from eating and sleeping, he read and thought. When he got tired of reading one book, or when his mind got stuck in some kind of stagnation, he would switch to another book, and when he could no longer progress in reading this book, he would switch back to the original one. Time passed slowly in this cycle and adjustment. Sang Sing cooked and cleaned, chatted with him when he was tired, and when she had the courage to walk into the cliff cave again, she quietly sat beside him, holding a needle and thread to embroider the soles of shoes. No matter how the two books helped Ninkei solve his problems and get rid of his life as a prisoner, the knowledge and wisdom of the predecessors in the book were enough to make him feel that he had gained a lot. The book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth made him come across this new world idea for the first time, and then in the following sections, he understood more new sayings. The so-called aura of heaven and earth was a kind of invisible particle that naturally existed in the wilderness and rivers, which was also called the chi of heaven and earth by cultivators. According to the book, all the chi of heaven and earth in the world originated from the sun and the sky, and only a small part came from the depths of the earth. These original auras began to show different characteristics as they soaked and washed over time, because of the different things attached to them, and because of the infection of the environment. For example, the chi of heaven and earth contained in the trees was completely different from the chi of heaven and earth in the stones. However, this difference was extremely subtle in the perception of ordinary cultivators, and it was difficult to be discovered. Ninkei thought of the feeling when he first saw the stone array tactics of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine by the Daming Lake, and found that the saying in the book was somewhat different from what his master Yensei had said, but it did make some sense. After thinking for a moment, he took out several pieces of fu paper and cast them one by one. Looking at the fire and water mist in front of him, he used his psyche power to carefully perceive the difference between them, and then carefully recorded what he learned on the paper. In the afternoon, after eating, he put the bowl beside him casually and began to cast fu again to experience the subtle difference between the chi of heaven and earth. When he was free in the old brush pen shop, he would write fu for leisure. Although the power of fu was still weak, he had saved a lot of fu paper, which was more than enough for experiments. This time he cast a water fu. The yellowish fu paper disappeared in the air, and the chi of heaven and earth in the cliff cave slowly converged and condensed into a handful of water, and then fell to the ground, falling right into the bowl. The water rippled in the bowl for a few times, and then became calm. Ninkei looked at the gradually muddy water in the bowl, and thoughtfully opened the book that described the no-boundary spirit of the academy beside him, and began to compare it with some contents in the book. Then, he cast a water talisman and let the water fall on the ground. He stared at the water that gradually disappeared along the cracks of the stone, like countless transparent earthworms. The bowl was an utensil, the cracks of the stones were utensils, and even the vault of heaven and field was just a large utensil. When the water fell into the bowl, it was a semicircle. When it fell into the cracks of the stones, it was a transparent earthworm. When it was released by the clouds, it was a bead curtain. When it flowed into the field, it was countless tiny particles. The water itself had no shape, and it only had shape because of the utensil that carried it. This was the real, no-boundary spirit. Was the chi of heaven and earth like this kind of existence? It was easy to draw such an inference. Looking at the book, Ninkei did not feel proud at all, and tried to find the connection between this inference and the inhibition of the cliff cave. After a long time, he woke up from his meditation and rubbed his eyebrows tiredly. Then he noticed that Sang Sang had come to him and was embroidering there. I remember before I went to the wilderness, you said that your embroidery was so bad that you didn't want people in Chang'an to see it, so you gave your needles and thread to Xiao Qiao. Where did this come from? Ning Ke asked. Sang Sang raised her head and scratched her temple with the end of the needle. She said, I asked seventh sister for this yesterday when I went down the mountain. I have to find something to do to kill time. Ning Ke thought that she was really bored staying on the cliff plateau. Then he suddenly thought of something and handed over the book of No Boundary Spirit in his hand. He said, You can read it when you are bored. Sang Sang was slightly startled and said, Can I read it too? These two books were the Academy's treasured supreme arts. They must have been carefully selected by the headmaster for his little disciple, and the common people could not read them. Logically speaking, Ning Ke should not let Sang Sang read them, but he had long been used to sharing all the good things with Sang Sang, and even ranked her ahead of himself. The most important thing was that he had been poor and afraid since childhood, so he was stingy. Now he no longer worried about money, but he still subconsciously wanted to take advantage of others. Ning Ke said, This is a good thing. You will suffer a loss if you don't read it. Sang Sang felt it was indeed a pity and said, But I can't understand it. Ning Ke said, Even the great divine priest of light, that shameless swindler, wants to accept you as his successor. You must be very talented in cultivation, maybe even better than me and Chin Pippi. You have been following me all these years, but I have not thought of exploring this side of you. Maybe a cultivation genius has been buried. Sang Sang laughed and said, You are making fun of me again. Ning Ke said, Never mind that. We will take advantage of you if you read it. Sang Sang thought it made sense. She took the book and began to read it carefully. Ning Ke continued to read the book. The more he read, the more he felt that it was reasonable for the West Hill Divine Palace to seal this book, because this book actually included the chi of heaven and earth absorbed by the Devil's Doctrine's cultivation method into the body, and it was the same as Hao Ian's divine light. Suddenly, his eyes suddenly brightened, because he saw a whole set of cultivation methods for cultivating chi at the back of the book. At the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, Ning Ke had inherited the youngest uncle's mantle. He had used the residual sword style in the modeled sword mark left by youngest uncle to directly create a path in Ning Ke's snow mountain and ocean of chi. Then the Great Spirit poured into his body and drove the cyclone in his lower abdomen to start absorbing the chi of heaven and earth around. For Ning Ke now, once he used his psyche power to drive the cyclone to start absorbing the chi of heaven and earth, he could no longer control the process. He did not know how to make the process more efficient. If the cultivation method left in this book was real, wouldn't it mean that he could cultivate the Great Spirit much faster? Could he improve his state in the shortest time possible? Ning Ke's hands holding the book trembled slightly. The depression of being imprisoned in the cliff cave was replaced by the surprise and gratitude to the headmaster of the academy and third sister. The academy's cultivation classics should be shared, and such a great harvest and happiness should be shared. He turned around immediately and wanted to tell Sang Sang about it. However, he saw that Sang Sang had already fallen asleep. Looking at Sang Sang, who was holding the book and sleeping soundly without leaning against the wall of the cliff cave, Ning Ke could not help but laugh. He thought that this little girl was indeed not made for cultivation, or at least not for reading. After a while, Ning Ke calmed down and quietly read the cultivation method in the book from beginning to end. He only closed his eyes slowly when he was sure that he could remember every word in the book. He began to cultivate chi for the first time. What he cultivated was the Great Spirit. The 4th chapter is finally written. I'm also useless. These chapters are too damn hard to write. There will definitely be an update after I wake up. But today's update will be very late. I'm going to sleep. I'll ask for a recommendation vote to stimulate me. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 383. To raise was to support, to nurture, to pity, to protect, and to mend. To raise chi was to carry out these actions on the chi of heaven and earth that was absorbed into the body. Ning Ke followed the description in the book and entered a state that was similar to meditation. However, it was not as deep as meditation, and he still maintained a continuous connection with the real world. This connection was breathing, or in other words, breathing. The air in the cliff cave entered his lungs according to the rhythm of breathing, and then returned to the outside through his mouth and nose. The chi of heaven and earth contained in the air gradually settled and stopped in the process, and began to nourish every part of his body, including the most subtle parts. Every time he breathed, Ninkei could feel a trace of chi of heaven and earth entering his body. This change was very subtle, but when he entered a certain rhythm, the superposition of this subtle change would become more obvious, even to the extent that he could feel the increase of the aura. After inheriting the youngest uncle's mantle at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, the process of absorbing the chi of heaven and earth and transforming it into the Great Spirit had always been slow. Moreover, at this time, he finally found that he could actively cultivate the Great Spirit, and from then on, it became something that he could control and look forward to. After the initial shock, he began to feel happy. This was a surprise. The night was deep, and the morning light was about to rise. In the cliff cave, Sang Sang was dozing off while Ning Kei sat cross-legged and seriously breathed every breath of air. He felt the chi of heaven and earth flowing into his body, like a drunkard drinking cans of hard liquor. He was so happy and intoxicated that he did not know where he was and where he would go. The airflow in the cliff cave brought in the slightly cold mountain wind under the warm morning light. It blew on Sang Sang's body and woke her up from her sleep. She rubbed her eyes. She looked at Ning Kei beside her with a confused look on her face. With the influx of the chi of heaven and earth, the Great Spirit in Ning Kei's body was increasing at a slow but unstoppable speed. His body was also changing because of this. This change was deeply hidden under his skin, between his muscles, and in his blood. Except for himself, no one could see any trace of it with the naked eye. But Sang Sang still felt that Ning Kei was undergoing some kind of change, because she could feel that in the space around her, there seemed to be a very faint existence, even fainter than the wind, slowly approaching Ning Kei's body. The morning mist between the cliffs also seemed to feel some kind of call and floated into the cave, gently covering Ning Kei's body. After a long time, Ning Kei woke up. He silently looked at the azure sky outside the cliff cave, deep in thought. The chi of heaven and earth was everywhere between the cliffs and the clouds. There was also the chi of heaven and earth in the quiet trees and the swimming fish. Therefore, when it entered the human body, it was still the chi of heaven and earth. Thinking in this way, what was the essential difference between the Hao-Ian divine flame of Hao-Ian Taoism and the genuine chi in the body of the powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine? The book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth talked about this truth and tried to solve the doubts of cultivators in theory, tried to establish a unified system. This new system would fundamentally overthrow the doctrine of Hao-Ian Taoism. No wonder it was banned by the West Hill Divine Palace. The other book told Ning Kei that he did not need to care about the form of the chi of heaven and earth. Just like water in nature, whether it was between cliffs, in the clouds, in the mountain stream, in the calm lake, or in the rushing river, the essence would not change. It was still water. The ideas of the two books were similar to a certain extent. However, the book on the origin of the aura of heaven and earth finally gave up the discussion of metaphysics and went directly to the road of cultivating a certain characteristic of the chi of heaven and earth to the extreme, because the extreme would eventually return to the origin of things. The headmaster of the academy imprisoned Ning Kei in the cliff cave, which was equivalent to asking a difficult question and putting 3 answers in front of him in advance. The ideas in the two books were the 2 methods that the headmaster of the academy taught him. Either to cultivate the Great Spirit to the extreme and powerful state and ignore the heaven and earth, or to use the no-boundary spirit to harmonize the Great Spirit inside the body with the chi of heaven and earth outside the body. Chun Pippi said there were 3 books, and these were 2 of them. Then what was the 3rd book? What other methods could he find by reading that book? In the following days, Ning Kei seemed to return to the time when he first entered the academy and went to the old library. His life was calm and simple. He ate, slept, read, thought, and then read again. He had no distractions and was fully focused on reading. He put all the boring time and life in the cliff cave into reading. With the help of the 2 books, Ninkei had a deeper understanding of the Great Spirit. The Great Spirit in his body became purer and more vigorous. At the same time, he had a better understanding of the operating rules and the existence of the chi of heaven and earth. He even made significant progress in talisman Taoism. He vaguely sensed the key to solve the problem of the headmaster of academy and to break the inhibition to leave the cliff cave. But he still could not grasp the thread. He could not figure out how to mix the 2 completely different auras with light and dust, or even turn their actual existence into nothingness. 10 days passed quickly. Third sister Yulian came. Her loose academy uniform fluttered in the cliff wall like a flag. She walked into the cliff cave and instantly became as quiet as the silk cloth on the table. Ninkei did not waste any time. After a simple salute, he took out the paper with the questions he had these days and seriously asked her about the problems he had encountered in reading. Yulian began to answer after thinking for a while. Her words were concise and even too simple. It seemed that she was a man of few words. However, these simple answers often fell on the most critical parts and directly made Ninkei's stagnant thoughts suddenly clear, and he easily saw a new path in the fog. Finally, Ninkei began to ask about the chi cultivation method at the back of the book after hesitating for a while. Yulian frowned slightly and remained silent. Ninkei glanced at Sang Sang, who was sitting outside the cliff cave and embroidering. He thought that senior sister was silent because there were outsiders from the academy present, and it was inconvenient. Yulian smiled and said, "Since the headmaster asked this little girl to accompany you, you don't mind her listening beside you. The so-called chi cultivation method seems to be from the devil's doctrine, but this cliff cave is far away from the world. Why do you care?" The next day, Chun Pippi climbed up the cliff platform panting. Ninkei naturally laughed at him and expressed his great displeasure that Chun Pippi did not come up to the cliff to visit him these days. Chun Pippi explained that the stone path was too slanted and the cliff was too steep, but Ninkei did not understand. He sighed helplessly and ignored this guy's annoyance. Then he began to practice the no-boundary spirit of the academy. The so-called no-boundary spirit means that there is no trace of it. Just like the snow mud, it is in the east and suddenly in the west. There is no way to know where the snow trembles. When you want to move, you move at will. If you don't, how can the enemy know what you want to do? Chun Pippi raised his right arm and pointed at the blue sky above the cliff with his ring finger. An invisible aura suddenly shot out from between his fingers, but did not shoot into the sky in the direction of his fingers. Instead, it shot into the cliff cave unpredictably. That invisible aura was the chi of heaven and earth that was compressed to the extreme. The aura brushed past Ninkei's shoulder and quietly fell on the hard rock wall of the cliff cave. With a soft sound, a dark round hole appeared on the wall. No one knew how deep the hole was. I was already very tired. Friends came from afar, and I drank a few cups of wine. I suddenly collapsed and suffered for a long time, but I could only write this much. You all know that I have been working hard these days, and I have a good attitude. I will continue to work hard tomorrow. Although I wrote less today, I really need the recommendation votes. After all, it's Monday. Please support me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 384. Ninkei did not react at all. It was not until the invisible chi of the finger brushed past his shoulder and shot a deep black hole on the cave wall that he came to his senses and felt a chill in his heart. He did not know that Chun Pippi's finger was the natural stream magical finger of Jisho Abbey. What shocked him was not the power of the finger, but the unpredictable changes when Chun Pippi pointed it. The finger was pointing at the clear sky, but why did it fall behind him? Was this the no-boundary spirit of the academy? Cultivators cultivate heaven and earth in themselves. We need to use the psyche power in our bodies to control the chi of heaven and earth. Our bodies are the firewood. Psyche power is the fire. Heaven and earth are the stove. Primordial chi is the ingredients such as vegetables, meat, and fish, and fighting skills are the way to match the ingredients. Apart from the above factors, the most important thing to make a delicious dish is the heat control when cooking. If you ask a chef how to control the heat, an ordinary chef will probably tell you when to use what kind of fire and how long to cook the food. However, a truly brilliant chef will not be so rigid. He will know what the food in the pot is just by using his palm to scoop quickly in the steam room. This is an experience that he has gained after countless trials. This kind of experience is difficult to explain in words. Sometimes, it can even make people feel that it is too mysterious. You can only feel and experience it on your own. Chun Pippi looked at Ning Ke in the cliff cave and said, "The heat control is the meaning." Ning Ke thought for a moment and understood what he wanted to say. He suddenly had a more intuitive understanding of the book that taught about the no-boundary spirit of the academy. Thinking of the example that Chun Pippi gave in the letter when he first entered the old library of the academy, he could not help but sigh and say, "Eating and sex are indeed human nature." You took these two things as examples, and it is really easy to understand. Third Sister and Chun Pippi were ordered by the headmaster of the academy to climb the cliff to teach, mainly to solve some problems that Ning Ke encountered in reading. The real understanding still depended on him. After Chun Pippi's explanation, Ning Ke decided to find time to digest it at night. There is no need to discuss too much at this time. He had been imprisoned in the cliff cave for 10 days and did not know what had happened in the world outside the academy. He asked, "Is Chang'an still peaceful recently?" Chun Pippi said, "When was Chang'an not peaceful? What are you concerned about?" Ning Ke said, "Someone in the imperial court seems to have a problem with me. I know that before I returned to the capital, someone even wanted to bring Sang Sang to the military ministry for interrogation. You were there." Chun Pippi nodded and said, "It's very simple. You don't need to worry about it." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "What about the two sadhus we met on the street a few days ago? Even if Dao Shi came from the Xiankong temple, he wouldn't have the ability to easily find me in Chang, and where there are so many people. That encounter seems to have been set up." Chun Pippi frowned slightly and asked, "What are you suspecting?" "In Chang, and only the Imperial Center Administration and the military could locate me so easily." Ning Ke said, "I don't know which of them informed the Xiankong temple." Hearing this, Chun Pippi frowned even more and said, "Helping outsiders to challenge the Academy's disciples who have entered the human realm? Even the military wouldn't have the guts to do that. Besides, aren't they worried that they would be scolded by the people of Chang and after the matter is exposed?" Ning Ke had lived in the Tang army for many years. Of course, he knew the style of the military very well. He said, "As long as it's good for the empire, the generals won't care about anything." Chun Pippi stayed on the cliff platform and ate the white meat and pickled cabbage hot pot cooked by Sang Sang. He wiped his oily lips and shamelessly ignored the mess and the piles of dirty bowls. He hummed a little tune and walked down the cliff happily. No matter how Ning Ke cursed him, he didn't fall into the abyss. Facing the cliff and the cloud, Ning Ke scolded Chun Pippi loudly. Unfortunately, the cliff was beside him and the cloud in front of him was the void. He couldn't hear any echo at all, so he inevitably felt a little lonely. Without wasting any time, he walked back to the depth of the cliff cave and sat on the old futon. He sat cross-legged and meditated with his eyes closed. He continued to cultivate the great spirit in his body according to the cultivation method in the book. The white clouds between the cliff seemed to be indifferent, but Sang Sang, who was squatting on the edge of the cliff and washing the bowls, clearly felt the change in the cave. She looked back, but there was no morning fog at this time, so she couldn't see the scene before. When the night shrouded the cliff, Ning Ke slowly opened his eyes and ended today's cultivation. Looking at Sang Sang, who was standing in front of him with a plate of food, he shook his head and said, "I'm not hungry yet. Put aside. If you're tired, go to rest early. If you're bored, talk with me for a while." Sang Sang knew that he had been worried that she would be bored and lonely. She also knew that with his temperament, he definitely wouldn't have any interest in chatting before he solved the problem. So she smiled and shook her head. She put the food beside him and walked back to the hut on the edge of the cliff. Ning Ke was still sitting cross-legged with his hands spread out on his knees. A yellowish fu paper appeared in his left palm. The fu paper was slowly disintegrating at a speed visible to the naked eye, releasing talisman intent into the air. His right palm was empty, but the light of the oil lamp was slightly deformed. The aura between the two palms were faintly different. The chi of heaven and earth condensed by the fu paper was above the left hand, while the pure Great Spirit overflowed from the right. He looked at the two invisible auras in front of him attentively. His deep psyche power slowly and carefully touched every fragment of the aura, trying to find something from it. The chi of heaven and earth condensed in his left hand and the Great Spirit in his right hand were both invisible and intangible like the void. But with his psyche power, he could clearly distinguish the difference. Since he was imprisoned in the cliff cave, Ning Ke had read the two books and practiced hard. Now he could clearly distinguish the aura of heaven and earth that seemed to be exactly the same, but actually had slight differences. But he still couldn't unify the aura of heaven and earth that had different forms into the same state, even if it was as similar as possible. He couldn't even sort out his thoughts in this aspect. According to the concept in the book, Examination of the Origin, the genuine chi in the body of the cultivators of the devil's doctrine and the Great Spirit in his body were actually a kind of chi of heaven and earth. If he could go back to the original state countless years ago and change the appearance of the Great Spirit into the original state, then he would be able to solve the inhibition in the cliff cave and have a perfect answer to the question given by the headmaster. But it was a pity that he was still at a level where he didn't know why. Not to mention that he couldn't deduce the specific operation method from what he knew. When he was challenged by Monk Guan Hai, he thought for half a day by the winter lake at the foot of Yiming Mountain and came up with a way to use the Great Spirit with talisman intent. And it was very effective. He could use the chaos of the primordial chi caused by the talisman intent to effectively cover the aura of the Great Spirit. But if he met a real grand cultivator, he would be seen through at a glance. As a core disciple of the headmaster of academy and a student of the second floor of the academy, even if he was seen through to join the devil, he probably wouldn't be killed immediately. But what if he was seen by others? On the futon in the depths of the cliff cave, Ning Ke looked at the two auras between his hands and thought for a long time. Although he looked calm on the surface, he was a little confused and frightened inside. Sang Sang walked back to the cave from the hut by the cliff and found a dry and quiet place. She opened the bedding and fell asleep. Ning Ke walked to her and quietly looked at her dark little face for a long time. Then he reached out to tuck the corner of the quilt and turned to go deeper into the cliff cave. These days, he had been thinking about solving the problem and didn't pay much attention to the cliff cave as a bedroom. At this time, his thoughts were a little chaotic, so he simply put these annoying things aside and walked slowly. The cliff cave wasn't big. There was an opening about 2 people's height on the side of the precipice. Inside, there was a space about 10 steps wide. The cave walls weren't smooth, nor were there any jagged rocks. Nothing special could be seen. Going deeper, there was a long, slanted cave on the left and right sides. These 2 caves were a little narrow. After walking for more than 10 steps, they came to the end. The deepest part was all hard and solid granite, and there was no possibility of going further. Ning Ke held the oil lamp and looked at the cave wall. There were countless fine cut lines on the stone wall. They might be formed naturally, but they looked more like they were cut by sharp metal objects. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. In the depths of the Tianchi Mountains in the northernmost part of the wilderness, in the abandoned front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, he had once seen the mottled sword marks left by youngest uncle on the blue stone wall. It was also because of those sword marks that he understood the true meaning of the Great Spirit and inherited youngest uncle's mantle that he was able to defeat the terrifying Master Lotus. He remembered that youngest uncle had been imprisoned by his teacher for 3 years. No one came to visit him, let alone Sang Sang. He must have been very depressed. Could it be that these 2 narrow holes were cut by him with a sword? If these 2 narrow holes were also left by youngest uncle, then would these marks that looked like they were made by knives and axes, like the mottled sword marks in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, would they contain some aura and some hidden meaning? Ning Ke held the oil lamp and stood in the middle of the wall full of cut lines. He gradually became excited. He went to get a wooden stick and held the oil lamp in front of the narrow cave entrance. With the dim light, he began to carefully examine the cut marks on the stone wall that looked like the ripples in the lake. No matter if his idea was correct or not, he should at least try. He looked for a long time, but did not see any aura hidden in these cut lines. He did not find any pattern in these lines, but he still did not give up. After a moment of silence, he stretched out his hands and placed them on the wall. He slowly touched the stone wall, feeling the roughness coming from the surface of his palms. He touched from the entrance to the bottom of the cave, from his feet to the top of his head. He did not let go of any cut line and did not miss any area. He did this for the whole night. The night outside the cliff cave was gradually replaced by the light blue sky. His face was full of exhaustion, but there was no sign of discouragement. Try to finish the next chapter before 12:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 385. Ning Ke spent the whole night looking at the cut marks on the cave wall and touching them carefully like a blind man. His palms turned red and even started to peel, but he still couldn't find any secrets left by youngest uncle. After meditating for 10 whole days, forgetting to eat and sleep for 10 whole days, and forcefully suppressing the anxiety in his heart and pretending to be calm for 10 whole days, he was already exhausted to the extreme. His mental state was very tense, and after such a fruitless night, all these negative things suddenly burst out. His messy black hair draped over his shoulders, and he looked haggard. Looking at the 2 books on his knees, Ning Ke kept muttering to himself. But because his voice was hoarse and weak, no one could hear what he was saying clearly. Sang Sang walked into the cave with water and looked at him worriedly. Ning Ke took the towel and rubbed his face absent-mindedly. When the wet towel was used to wipe off the sticky and dried mud at the corner of his eyes, it tore a very thin cut, which made him frown in pain. The wet towel was cold. His cheeks turned red, not knowing whether it was because of fatigue or pain. The scarlet color appeared on his cheeks, which were slightly pale because of the lack of sunlight. It was not very good looking, but looked very unhealthy, like a person who had been sick for a long time. His mental state was extremely bad, so the efficiency of reading and learning naturally became extremely low. He held the 2 books and tried to read them, but found that he seemed to be reading the classics in the old library, and he became the loser who couldn't cultivate again. The ink characters on the paper floated up mischievously and began to swim around like tadpoles, which could not be caught no matter how hard he tried. He closed the book helplessly, closed his eyes, and began to review what he had learned a few days ago. However, his mental state was so bad that even his brain seemed to become unclear, and there was a big deviation in his memory. When he thought about some problems in the book, he couldn't remember what Senior Sister Yulien said at that time, even though Senior Sister Yulien had already given the answer the day before yesterday. Depressed and annoyed, he naturally said what he thought. His hoarse and tired voice was so vague that he was completely murmuring to himself to vent his emotions. However, he didn't expect that Sang Sang, who had been sitting quietly beside him, would suddenly say something, which was the answer given by Senior Sister Yulien the day before yesterday. Ning Ke was slightly stunned, and then he remembered that his little handmaiden's memory had always been extraordinary. Sang Sang began to repeat what Yulien and Chun Pippi said 2 days ago. However, Ning Ke was in such a bad state that he reluctantly waved his hand after listening for a while, indicating that there was no need to continue. He threw the 2 books beside the futon like garbage, stood up, stretched, and yawned. He slowly walked to the cliff cave entrance and looked at the world outside. The cliff behind the back mountain of the academy was extremely beautiful, even breathtakingly beautiful. However, even if the lines on the precipice were like knives that pierce people's hearts, they were not real knives after all. After looking at them for a long time, they would always be the same lines. The azure sky in front of the cliff was as if it would never change. It stayed there quietly and peacefully. The initial beauty had now gradually turned into the dull blue paint of the worst painter. The flowing clouds and deep fog at the waist of the cliff were also the same. Looking at the scenery outside the cliff cave, Ning Ke felt slightly cold. It had only been 10 days, and he had been busy with cultivation these days, so he didn't have much time to enjoy the scenery. Now he was already tired of it. If he was really imprisoned in the cliff cave for 10 months or even 10 years, how could he survive? Just when he began to feel empty, lonely, and cold, there suddenly came a lively sound on the stone path below the cliff plateau. The sound of clothes rustling and footsteps was more of a choral. With the addition of these voices, the scenery of the precipice, which seemed to be eternally unchanging, suddenly flowed and became lively for some reason. It had a completely different beauty from before. It turned out that emptiness and loneliness had nothing to do with the scenery, but only with people. "It's too hard to climb. It's too terrible." 12th brother said we couldn't come up. I said we should call youngest brother at the waterfall and show our friendship. But you just had to climb up here. 9th brother Beigong Weiyong complained while panting. He angrily waved the antique flute in his hand, as if he wanted to drive all his companions down the cliff. The mountain wind drilled into the flute and then out, making a low whimper as if it was crying, but more like his panting at this time. 5th brother wiped the sweat from his forehead and took down the dripping with chessboard on his back. He looked at him and said with a sneer, "But we finally climbed up." Beigong Weiyong carefully moved 2 steps to the edge of the cliff and looked down. Then he quickly stepped back several steps and patted his chest with lingering fear. He said, "I'm just worried that I can't go down later." Ning Ke was very touched that the 7 senior brothers came together to visit him. He stood at the cliff cave entrance and excitedly waited for them to show concern for him. Unexpectedly, after waiting for a long time, he found that they only cared about bickering. Finally, he couldn't help but remind them loudly, Hey, I'm here." The disciples of the back of the mountain of the academy were often crazy about their own things. In addition, the back of the mountain was too big, so they couldn't see each other every day. Sometimes they couldn't even see each other for dozens of days. But the friendship between fellow disciples would not be weakened because of this. Ning Ke was the latest to enter the sect and was the youngest younger brother. Naturally, he was loved and taken care of by his senior brothers. The senior brothers worried that the youngest brother was imprisoned in the cliff cave and lonely and complained too much. So they specially went to the headmaster of the academy and got permission to visit him. Then they came together. However, when they really saw the haggard and pale youngest brother in the cliff cave, they didn't know what to say. Because no matter from which angle they looked at it, these crazy people in the back of the mountain of the academy were really not good at comforting people. Everyone looked at Wang Qi because they all knew that he liked thinking, and the most important thing was that he was the 11th and the youngest among all the people who went up the mountain. So this difficult task was naturally given to him. Wang Qi was silent for a long time and silently organized the words in his heart. Finally, he thought of how to say it. He squeezed out a fake smile with difficulty and looked at Ning Ke seriously. He said, "Since the headmaster doesn't stop us from coming up the mountain to see you, then we will come to see you every day. In this way, even if you really can't come out for the rest of your life, it is not too troublesome. You can also take the opportunity to study in peace." Ning Ke's face suddenly darkened, and he said, "11th brother, I'm not a wildflower in the forest who only knows how to talk but only knows how to talk. Can you say something auspicious?" 5th brother hurriedly came forward with the chessboard. He smiled and sat in front of the line at the entrance of the cliff cave. He threw the urn containing the black pieces to Ning Ke and said, "The only way to solve your worries is to play chess." Ning Ke held the urn and said helplessly, "My body can't cross the line. How can I play chess?" 5th brother thought it was reasonable and reached out to take the urn back. Then he said, "You tell me, and I will let 8th brother play for you." 8th brother lightly flicked the wide sleeves of his academy uniform and floated over like an immortal. Then he sat beside 5th brother and glanced at Ning Quebec. He said, "Youngest brother, although it is to relieve your boredom and amuse you, you have to be serious. Although I am playing for you, I still don't want to lose to him." Beigong Weiyong sneered and said, I heard that the headmaster gave youngest brother 3 books. Looking at his expression now, I am afraid that he has consumed a lot of energy. How can he have the energy to play chess with you? Ninkei thought that this sentence was really appropriate and reliable. Beigong Weiyang turned to look at Ninkei and said, "Youngest brother, let Shimin and I play a song to help you calm down." Ninkei was silent for a while and looked at fifth brother. He said, "Senior brother, I will go first." The sound of zither and flute was elegant and distant. The chess pieces fell on the wooden chessboard and made a clear and moving sound. From time to time, fifth brother's angry rebuke and eighth brother's incessant support for Ninkei could be heard. Countless sounds mixed together, and there was no beauty to speak of. It was noisy and indescribable. At this time, the cliff cave was not lonely at all. It was as lively as the vegetable market in the southern city of Chong, and in the morning. Ninkei held a black chess piece and thought in a daze. Is this also a retreat? He suddenly missed the previous emptiness, loneliness, and coldness. Fourth brother, who had been silent, finally couldn't stand it anymore. He sternly drove those crazy people out of the cave and then looked at Ninkei, who was relieved. He said, "Everyone is just being kind." Ninkei sincerely replied, "I can understand." Fourth brother said again, "What we have learned is not helpful for you to break through. Today, we are here to encourage you. What do you want?" Ninkei smiled and shook his head. He was going to ask Sang Sang to make tea for senior brothers. Although he was now a prisoner of the academy, there was indeed some good tea in the hut. However, when he looked at Sang Sang, he found that the little girl was standing on the edge of the cliff with sixth brother. They were pointing at the hut and talking about something. Sixth brother kept nodding honestly. When sixth brother walked back to the cliff cave, everyone knew what he and Sang Sang had been discussing. They were going to completely renovate the hut. Not only did they strengthen and renovate it, but the most important thing was to build a rain corridor to directly connect the hut with the cliff cave. If it was on flat ground, such a large-scale renovation project was naturally not a big deal. However, the cliff plateau was suspended between the precipices of the back mountain, and the transportation of materials was a big problem. Beigong Weiyang looked at the steep and narrow stone path, and his face suddenly became extremely pale. His hunch was indeed right. Fourth brother looked at everyone coldly and said, "You all have to do it." Although they were all infatuated with music, chess, flowers, and trees, they were all powerhouses who had already entered the upper see-through state as the core disciples of the headmaster of academy. New trees, old stones, and countless materials were continuously sent to the cliff plateau and then handed over to sixth brother to build by himself. In less than half a day, this seemingly difficult work was successfully completed. The hut on the edge of the cliff was 1 story higher and was fixed by 14 beams against the cliff. Wang Shi secretly went to the hut on the other side of the mountain and stole many frost-colored long grass that the headmaster liked the most. He locked them on the beams with thin iron chains. It not only looked beautiful and elegant, but also there was no need to worry about any storms in the future. The roofed corridor between the hut and the cliff cave was more exquisitely designed. Thin trees without their barks were hanging in the air, covered with 6 straw mats that seventh sister had robbed from second brother's yard. The straw mats were torn with many small holes, and thin green vines were running through them, adding a lot of business to the sky. Ninkei stood at the entrance of the cave and looked at the new and extremely beautiful cliff plateau. He looked at those senior brothers who were covered with mud and sweat and were giggling at the green vines in the rain corridor. He suddenly felt that the slightly cold wind in the mountain became warm. "I have to get up at 5:30 tomorrow to send my friend to the airport, so I have to go to sleep now. Today I will only write 2 chapters, and tomorrow I will write 4 chapters, maybe more. There are only 4 days left, and there are 60 or 70,000 words left. I have to work harder. Ninkei also has to work harder tomorrow. He will succeed soon, and I will strive for success." I cry silently. Zhou Tue is the first. Thank you very much. It is past midnight now. Please vote for me with your recommendation votes. Thank you very much. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 386. The green vines were not dense, and there were many gaps in the middle. The sunlight was reflected by the fine leaves, changing brightness and brightness, which made a completely different scenery. Ninkei expressed his most sincere gratitude to his senior brothers and asked them to stay for dinner, but they laughed at him. Everyone laughed and said, "Even if you live in a hut on the edge of the cliff, youngest brother is still a poor prisoner, not a real hermit. Why do you have to pretend to be a host?" The senior brothers, who were dirty and looked like laborers, waved goodbye to him. They held the cliff wall beside the stone path, rubbed their sore necks, and groaned as they walked down the mountain. Because sixth brother had to finish the renovation of the hut, he stayed for a longer time. It was not until the sun was setting in the west that he packed his things and prepared to leave. When saying goodbye, Ninkei asked about the thing he had asked him a few days ago. Sixth brother said, "It's not too difficult to cast 3 knives into one. The design has been completed and the process has been arranged. But you asked for all 3 knives in it, so the blade of the new knife will inevitably be too heavy. It's difficult to meet the requirements with ordinary materials. You need a kind of ball ink powder. The Imperial Court has sent people to the southern mine to dig it, and they should be back next month." He calculated the time and then said, "If the materials are all ready, they should be out before summer." After leaving Min Mountain for the city of Wei, Ninkei's usual weapon was the 3 slender padeos. With the 3 padeos, he killed countless horse gang on the grassland. They also helped him fight all the way from the frontier fortress to Chong and city into the rainy night of Spring Breeze Pavilion and then back to the wilderness. It was the continuous battles in the wilderness that made him regret to find that the 3 padeos could no longer give him the most firm confidence and the most powerful support in the battle of cultivation powerhouses like in the past years. Instead, they dragged him back because of their fragility. Currently, the most powerful weapons in Ninkei's hands were the primordial 13 arrows and the fu paper. Fourth brother and sixth brother had already repaired the primordial 13 arrows perfectly for him, but he still wanted a suitable close-range weapon. Because of their past relationship and familiarity, the saber was naturally his first choice. A few days ago, Ninkei had solemnly handed over the 3 slender padeos that he regarded as his life partners to sixth brother, asking him to help him combine the 3 padeos into one. No matter how one looked at it, this request did not meet the standards of smelting and casting. It was too simple and even a little boring. Therefore, he didn't hold much hope towards this matter, but he had always held a sliver of hope in the depths of his heart. At this moment, when he heard his 6 senior brother's words, he couldn't help but be greatly pleasantly surprised. Although the 6th senior brother was a man of few words, his heart was as passionate as the fire in a furnace, and his character was as pure as refined steel. He would never speak if he was not confident. Sixth brother looked at him and said with an honest smile, "Junior brother, is there anything else you need to do? Now I can't wait to see what the saber that you have made looks like. How can I have the mood to care about other things?" Ninkei said with a smile. Suddenly, he saw Sang Sang, who was standing under the green vines in the rain corridor, tying the thread. Suddenly, he thought of something and slightly raised his eyebrows. Back then, by the Daming Lake in the wilderness, he and Imo Shanshan were still no match for the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, especially when the depths of the water fish that Yi Hongyu had summoned shone with thousands of rays of light, illuminating the verdant valley and the quiet lake. He actually had the idea that he couldn't fight against it at all. Ninkei remembered many details of that battle very clearly. But the scene that really left a long time of fear in his heart was the scene of the rising sun on the lake surface. If Imo Shanshan hadn't used the divine talisman to evaporate the lake water and turn it into mist at the critical moment, which slightly dimmed the light, he would probably have been killed by Yi Hongyu at that time. Later, Ninkei found out that Yi Hongyu had displayed the divine skill of the West Hill Divine Palace. Even she had just comprehended it for a short time, but it already had such great power. As a disciple of the Academy, he naturally had to think about how to fight against the Peach Mountain. As the successor of the youngest uncle, Ninkei had an innate reason to fight against the West Hill Divine Palace. As a person who had joined the devil, he had to think about how to defeat the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism all the time, especially after he had destroyed Prince Longqing. He believed that the people in the Divine Hall must be looking forward to defeating or even destroying him. These things would naturally be realized by Yi Hongyu. Ning Ke and Yi Hongyu had fought, talked, and traveled together. He knew that the Tao addict, who was proficient in all kinds of cultivation methods, had an unfathomable state and potential. He also knew that she was probably one of the few cultivators in the world who was proficient in fighting skills in essence like himself. Now his state had suddenly increased, and he had made rapid progress. But he felt that Yi Hongyu's progress would definitely not be slower than his. Therefore, he had to think of some ways to narrow the gap between them. The first thing he had to do was to find a way to deal with Haotian's divine light. Ning Ke asked, "Senior brother, there is something that I don't know if it can be made." Sixth brother liked making things all his life, and he knew that the youngest brother in the cave often had some unimaginable ideas. Hearing this, he became happy and said, "Did you design it?" "I don't think so." Ning Ke was a little hesitant. He raised his hands and put them on his eyes. Then he began to describe in a low voice what the thing looked like and what characteristics it had. Listening to Ning Ke's description, Sixth brother thought for a moment and regretfully shook his head. He said, "It is much easier to make than that knife. There is nothing special about it, and it is not difficult. It can be made in 10 days. When you come out of seclusion to get the knife, you can take it with you." After seeing sixth brother off, Ning Ke sat at the entrance of the cliff cave. He held his chin and looked at Sang Sang, who was busy in the corridor. Suddenly, he laughed proudly. Sixth brother felt that the thing was too simple and not challenging, so he felt a little regretful. But Ning Ke was very happy, because if that thing could really deal with Haotian's divine light, then Sang Sang, as the successor of the divine priest of light, would not be his opponent even if she knew the divine skill. Of course, it was very important to win the battle with the Tao addict of the West Hill Divine Palace or to keep his life. But to win the competition with his little handmaiden or to keep the dignity of a man and a parent was the most important thing for Ning Quebec. The hut by the cliff was renovated. The thin branches of the green vines in the corridor swayed with the wind. The beautiful cliff scenery suddenly had many different sceneries and the atmosphere of life. The arrival of senior brothers made the loneliness of being abandoned by the world and the worst memories of wandering in the world with Sang Sang disappear. Ning Ke's state of mind was much calmer. He continued to read and meditate and was no longer as restless and depressed as he was a few days ago. The most important thing was the change of mentality. When sixth brother left, he casually said that he wanted to take that thing when he broke through the barrier to get the knife. He did not feel any self-pity because of this sentence and naturally agreed, because he had already thought it through. Since he had made up his mind to Sang Sang that night, if he still could not find a way to break the inhibition set by the headmaster of academy after 3 months, he would directly destroy the great spirit in his body. This recognition or decision seemed simple, but in fact it contained a terrible determination and firmness. Ordinary people's state of mind could not bear this kind of pain, but Ning Ke could. Because he could now calm down. On the 21st day of being imprisoned in the cliff cave, third sister Yulian came to solve his doubts and teach him as promised. But this time, there was an equally charming figure beside her. Ning Ke looked at Tang Xiaodong's childish face and said in shock, "You really want to stay in the academy? Did the teacher really accept you? Do I have to call you younger sister in the future?" Tang Xiaotang laughed and said, "Isn't it good to have a younger sister?" Ning Ke said, "I am now imprisoned in the cliff. Of course I can't have a younger sister. I feel a little suffocated thinking about it. If you sing a few more Desolate Man folk songs, I may vomit blood." No one beside the cliff cave could understand his complaints, not even Sang Sang. Yu Yin smiled and said, "Little girl is too naughty. Quickly greet your youngest uncle." Ning Ke's eyes moved back and forth between senior sister and Tang Xiaodang. After a moment of hesitation, he asked uncertainly, "Tang Xiaodang, is senior sister's disciple?" Yu Yin nodded calmly. Ning Ke was shocked. Tang Xiaodang was a girl from the Devil's Doctrine, and her brother Tang was the current world wayfarer of the Devil's Doctrine. The academy actually kept her. Whether it was the headmaster of the academy accepting her as a disciple, or third sister accepting her as a disciple, it was the irrefutable evidence that the academy protected the Devil's Doctrine in the eyes of the world. Yulian looked at Ning Ke and said lightly, "Younger brother, you have seen my disciple, and you also know that her identity is a little special. So try not to mention her in the future." If the news that the academy had accepted a disciple from the Devil's Doctrine as a disciple spread to the world, it would definitely cause a great disturbance. The West Hill Divine Palace and hundreds of millions of Haotian believers in the world would definitely not allow this to happen. No matter how powerful the academy was, it could not defeat the whole world and the omnipresent Haotian divine light in this world. Otherwise, how could those things have happened in the past? Ning Ke thought of the great spirit in his body and youngest uncle who was killed by heaven's punishment. After a moment of silence, he looked at third sister and said solemnly, "That's how it should be." He looked at Tang Xiaodang and found that the girl's childish expression was calm. It seemed that she did not know how much trouble and danger she would bring to the people in this mountain by studying in the academy. He wanted to remind her, but he thought that he had already joined the devil and brought a lot of unsolved troubles to the academy, which forced the headmaster to imprison him here. He could not help but laugh at himself. The Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, and her brother, the world wayfarer of the Jishou Abbey, have seen Tang Xiaoding. We must be careful in the future and try not to let her leave the academy. Ning Ke reminded Yulian. Yulian said calmly, "Since this girl has become my disciple, how can she leave the academy if she can't kill Yi Hongyu? This is the first chapter for today. I will definitely finish the second chapter before 9 o'clock. I am pressuring myself. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 387. Hearing this, Tang Xiaodang opened her eyes wide and asked confusedly, "But I always cover my face with a fox's tail. How could they recognize me?" Yulian looked at her new student and said slowly, "Everyone has their own unique mark, especially for cultivators. You can think of it as a smell." Ning Ke did not participate in the discussion. He sat silently in the cliff cave and looked calm, but his heart was in turmoil because of third sister's words. When he was still an ordinary student in the front yard, he met Yulian in the sword forest. Yulian showed her disapproval when she knew that he wanted to enter the second floor of the academy. She said that if he gave up, she could introduce a powerhouse who was not weaker than Liu Bai to be his teacher. Liu Bai, the sage of sword, was recognized as the most powerful person in the world. Yulian lived in the academy and stayed away from people all year round. How could she know a powerhouse who was not weaker than Liu Bai? Ning Ke clearly remembered his shock when he heard this and her sigh of pity when he said that he still wanted to enter the second floor of the academy. What Yulian said today sounded ordinary, but it was full of confidence and pride, because it meant that since Tang Xiaodang was her student, it would be unreasonable if she could not defeat or even kill the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, in the future. Her expression was still tranquil. She was not deliberately arrogant in front of anyone. Instead, she had casually said those words based on some kind of almost instinctive self-judgment. It was this kind of casual and ordinary that made her more unfathomable. Thinking of the conversation in the sword forest, Ning Ke could not help but feel a little confused. Everyone in the back of the mountain of the academy knew that third sister's cultivation was in the upper state of see-through. Where did her calm confidence come from? Ning Ke thought about it and finally concluded that it was the common temperament of the disciples in the back of the mountain of the academy. Third sister was ranked only after eldest brother and second brother, so she had the right to be unreasonably confident. He said sincerely, "Senior sister, you are the first person in the back of the mountain to accept a student. Congratulations." Yulian said, "It's all the teacher's arrangement." She looked back at Tang Xiaodang and said calmly, "Come and greet uncle." Tang Xiaodang walked to the front of the cliff cave and stood a little outside the line. She stopped smiling and bowed with a solemn expression. Xiaodang greets youngest martial uncle. Ning Ke noticed that the little girl's old fur coat had been replaced by a brand new academy uniform. The old leather boots on her feet had been replaced by a pair of small green cloth shoes, which looked very refreshing. As he was sizing her up, he suddenly heard the 3 words, youngest martial uncle. For some reason, his mood suddenly became extremely comfortable. A moment later, he understood where this wonderful feeling came from. Firstly, he didn't have to worry about having a junior sister. Secondly, he was 1 generation older than Tang Xiaodang. Wouldn't that mean that the Devil's Doctrine World Wayfarer would have to respect him in the future? The most important thing was that for the Academy, youngest uncle was a title with special meaning. There was a youngest uncle in the back of the mountain of the Academy. He was the most remarkable figure in the world, and a legendary figure that second brothers still worshipped. Now Ning Ke had become the youngest uncle in the eyes of the disciples of the next generation. In every generation, there was only 1 junior brother, so naturally, there could only be 1 junior uncle. Thinking that from now on, there might be even more people who would constantly greet him respectfully and call him junior uncle, he felt very proud. After bowing, Tang Xiaodang straightened up and found that Ning Ke's expression kept changing, as if he was extremely intoxicated. Naturally, she couldn't guess what he was thinking at this time. They had met in the wilderness and reunited in Chang'an. She was most familiar with Ning Ke in the academy. Moreover, they were similar in age, so it was really difficult to treat him as a real teacher. She tilted her head and looked at him. She felt that his expression was so funny that she couldn't help giggling. Ning Ke looked at her and said, "Call me youngest martial uncle again." Of course, Tang Xiaodang didn't want to call him youngest martial uncle. In her opinion, a weak and shameless guy like Ning Ke was not qualified to be her teacher. Previously, because of the teacher's order, and she had to meet everyone when she first entered the academy, she restrained her temper and bowed to call him youngest martial uncle. "Call me youngest martial uncle." Ning Ke didn't notice the change in her expression. He said happily, "I like to hear people call me youngest martial uncle. I'm the only 3rd-generation disciple of the academy." Tang Xiaodang gritted her teeth and looked at him. "There's no one else." Ning Ke said, "So you should come to the cliff cave to visit me more often and call me youngest martial uncle." Tang Xiaodang said angrily, "If you do that again, I won't come play with you anymore." Ning Ke said proudly, "Now I'm more senior than you. You have to listen to me." Tang Xiaodang said angrily, "Don't forget that I'm the first among the 3rd-generation disciples of the academy. That means I'll be the eldest sister of the academy in the future. Youngest martial uncle, if you don't want your children or beloved disciples to be bullied by me for the rest of their lives, you'd better not bully me too much now." Ning Ke was startled and said with emotion, "The prosperous Central Plains is indeed a place that erodes bones and souls. A little girl from the wilderness who knows nothing about worldly affairs has become sly in such a short time. It's really boring." Tang Xiaodang ignored him and walked to Sang Sang. She took her little hand and pulled her into the hut. She began to care about how Sang Sang was doing on the cliff plateau and what she needed her to do. Sang Sang was not used to her cheerfulness and enthusiasm. After a while, she remembered that they had agreed to be friends outside the hut on the other side of the mountain a month ago. Her little face showed a happy smile. She told Tang Xiaodang about her life on the cliff plateau. Although it sounded boring, it seemed that everything was fine. Tang Xiaodang felt relieved after making sure that her best friend was not bullied by youngest martial uncle Ning Ke and did not suffer any hardships. She pulled Sang Sang to sit on the ground and began to play. Sang Sang was less than 15 years old, and Tang Xiaodang was even younger. Both of them were very simple. They were actually still little girls. They played stone chess, which was the favorite game of children. At the entrance of the cliff cave, senior sister Yulian was looking through the learning problems Ning Ke had memorized these days. After a moment of silence, she raised her head and began to explain some of the principles in a low voice. Ning Ke listened attentively to his senior sister's elegant and soft voice. He found that many things that he could not understand were suddenly enlightened after her concise explanation and reminder. It was obvious that Yulian did not understand the Great Spirit, but she was very knowledgeable about the circulation of the chi of heaven and earth, especially the subtle differences between different materials. Moreover, she was extremely knowledgeable, so she could easily tell Ning Ke about the cultivation past or exquisite metaphors. What shocked Ning Ke the most was that this senior sister's way of thinking was so ethereal. She could often find the possibility in the impossible and see the beautiful scenery in the end of the world. Time passed slowly, and the sunlight outside the precipice gradually became stronger. Ning Ke was immersed in the scenery that his senior sister had pointed out for him and could not extricate himself. His admiration for his senior sister had reached an extreme level. He thought to himself that she was indeed a woman who was second only to his two senior brothers in the back of the mountain of the academy. Whether it was knowledge, wisdom, or vision, she was so powerful that even Chun Pippi was not as good as her. Yulian's lessons were always concise and clear without any nonsense. It was just past noon, and she had already answered all of Ning Ke's questions. Without waiting for Ning Ke's thanks or any small talk, she calmly stood up and called out Tang Xiaodang in the hut. She nodded slightly to the cave and then floated down the mountain. Between the narrow and steep cliff, two petite figures in two loose academy uniforms of the same style appeared and disappeared from time to time. It did not take long for them to arrive at the waterfall. Previously in the hut on the cliff plateau, Tang Xiaodang played with Sang Sang and asked her to play stone chess with her. Stone chess was a simple game that all children from the wilderness to the great river kingdom could play. Because of its simplicity, there were often no rules for winning or losing. However, she had not won a single round. Tang Xiaodang was a strong-willed and competitive girl from the Devil's Doctrine. At the beginning, she lost more than 10 rounds in a row. If it were someone else, they would probably feel bored and give up in the face of such a simple game. However, she refused to give up and insisted on playing with Sang Sang. In the end, she lost 129 rounds. It was such a simple game of stone chess, but she had lost 129 rounds in a row. Tang Xiaodang could not figure out how it happened. No matter how strong-willed she was, she could not help but show some frustration on her face. She looked at her teacher and asked in distress, "Teacher, am I stupid?" Yu Lian walked slowly from the edge of the cliff to the narrow gorge. She said, "You are not stupid. You just foolishly chose the wrong opponent." Tang Xiaodang followed her from a distance and asked curiously, "I know Sang Sang is the successor of the divine priest of light, but playing chess is not cultivation. How could she not win a round?" Yu Yin said calmly, "In the past decades, only the divine priest of light possessed true wisdom on the Peach Mountain of the West Hill Divine Palace. The successor he chose was naturally extraordinary. As for why she couldn't even win a single round, it's because she treated you as a true friend. That's why she was very serious." Hearing that Sang Sang treated her as a real friend, Tang Xiaodang showed a happy smile on her childish face. She bounced like a naughty stone and chased after Yulian. Her previous frustration and sadness were blown into the abyss by the wind in the gorge and could not be found anymore. Thinking that her good friend stayed on the cliff all day long, Tang Xiaodang suddenly became unhappy again. She complained, "Ning Ke is such a shameless guy. It's okay that he is imprisoned, but he is also a burden to Sang Sang." Yulian stopped and said, "He is your youngest uncle. How can you call him by his name?" Tang Xiaodang stuck out her tongue behind her and explained, "I am used to calling him Ning Quebec." Yulian said calmly, "If you do it again after teaching, you will be punished according to the rules of the academy." Tang Xiaodang was slightly surprised and asked, "How?" Yulian said, "Walk to the top of the waterfall and then jump down." Tang Xiaodang looked at the silver waterfall not far away and said sadly, "It seems a bit high." Yulian said, 129 times. This is the second chapter. I will try to finish the third chapter before 11 o'clock. I can do it. I am a new generation of mountain monster. To be continued. If you like this work, please come a Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 388. Tang Xiaodang followed her brother's advice and traveled thousands of miles to the south from the wilderness. She went through all kinds of hardships and finally arrived at Chang'an. Then she met the headmaster of the academy and finally entered the academy. According to their original plan, she should directly become a disciple of the headmaster of the academy. However, for some unknown reason, the headmaster of the academy did not expel her from the academy or accept her as a student because of her identity as a member of the Devil's Doctrine. Instead, he handed her over to Yulian and asked her to accept her as a disciple. For the world, the second floor of the academy was still mysterious, but it was a place that connected the two worlds. Especially for the siblings who were already at the top of the cultivation world, many people in the back of the mountain of the academy had heard of it. Not to mention people like Mr. First and Mr. Second, or Chun Pippi, who was regarded as a treasure by Haotian Taoism. Even people like Beigong Weiyang were famous in their own fields and countries before they entered the academy to cultivate. However, they were gradually forgotten by the world as time passed. However, not many people knew that there was a third sister on the second floor of the academy. Her name was Yulian. The headmaster of the academy ordered Tang Xiaodang to become a disciple of Yulian. The little girl was shocked, and her first thought was to refuse. The female professor in the loose green uniform was quiet, elegant, and amiable, but her realm was not profound. She was only about the same as her, maybe even weaker than her. She was the woman who wanted to be the strongest in the world. So how could she accept a woman whose realm was weaker than her as her teacher? However, when she was about to refuse, Yulian glanced at her indifferently. The eyes of the third sister of the academy were just like her, soft and fragile. However, they had their own grace and grace. Tang Xiaodang suddenly felt that she did not dare to disobey. Tang Xiaodang had lived in the cold region of the far north since she was a child and lived a hard life. The bloodline of the desolate man and the education of the Devil's Doctrine made her naturally easygoing. At a young age, she dared to carry a huge blood-red machete and fight with the terrifying snowfield direwolves. She dared to fight with Yi Hongyu and even cut the ice peach condensed by Prince Longqing. However, such a fearless girl from the Devil's Doctrine felt fear when facing Yu Lian's calm and gentle eyes. She did not dare to be presumptuous at all. You want me to jump 129 times? Looking at her teacher's petite back, Tang Xiaodang was so shocked that her voice trembled. On the one hand, it was because the punishment was too severe, and, on the other hand, it was exactly the same number of times she lost to Sang Sang on the cliff platform. She didn't mention it. So how did she know? Could it be that when she answered Ning Kei's questions at the entrance of the cliff cave, she had completely grasped the situation on the cliff plateau? Yu Yin turned around and said, "You knew that you were no match for Sang Sang in stone chess, but you kept on fighting and refused to admit defeat. You lost 129 games in a row. You look brave, but you're actually stupid. If you are always so hot-headed, how can you defeat Yi Hongyu?" Tang Xiaodang stubbornly said, "Even if I'm stupid, I can't admit defeat. If I keep playing like this, who knows when I might really win a round." Yu Yin said calmly, "I know you can't change your temperament, so I'm not going to correct it. Since you insist that courage is the most important thing in the world, I will try my best to train and stabilize your courage from now on. Letting you jump into the waterfall is one of the things I will do. Are you afraid?" This was the simplest way to provoke her. Of course, Tang Xiaodang understood it. However, even though she knew this, she still could not control her emotions and stubbornly walked to the waterfall. From this point of view, as Ning Kei sighed with emotion, Yu Lian was probably a very good teacher. She understood her student's temperament and could make good use of it. It's easy to jump from the waterfall. We all know that she has been cultivating the Devil's Doctrine since she was a child. Even if she is injured, it won't be fatal. However, it's difficult to climb up the slippery cliff. Moreover, senior sister asked her to climb up from the waterfall. You didn't see how big the water was and how slippery the moss on the stones was. That girl jumped and climbed for a whole night. Her face was swollen and there were small wounds all over her body. She looked miserable. Isn't second brother's courtyard close to the waterfall? He was the first to raise an objection. He thought that teaching a student like this was really a trick. In the end, even eldest brother stood up and pleaded for Tang Xiaodang. But guess what? Senior sister didn't even give face to the two senior brothers. She's still jumping now. Speaking of which, this girl is really stupid and stubborn. When she fell from the waterfall, she didn't make a sound and didn't beg for mercy. It was as if she was angry with senior sister. How many times did she jump? It was already late at night when I arrived. I don't know how many times she jumped before, but I saw her jump more than 30 times. It should be almost 60 times, but it's still less than half of senior sister's requirement. 129 times. Even if she really completed it, I'm afraid she would be crippled. I really don't know what senior sister is thinking. She usually looks so quiet and gentle, but after taking a female student, she became so terrible. Do you think there are some emotional problems hidden in it? On the 22nd day of Ning K's imprisonment in the cliff cave, Chun Pippi climbed up to the precipice plateau according to the arrangement of the headmaster of academy to explain the no-boundary spirit of the academy. However, it was obvious that this fat man was not in the mood to preach today. He sat outside the cliff cave, waving his arms and spitting saliva, expressing the most painful objection and anger towards what had happened in the back of the mountain of the academy since yesterday morning. After listening for a while, Ning Ke roughly understood what had happened. He couldn't help but feel a little anxious when he thought that Tang Xiaodang had fallen into such a miserable state because she didn't call him youngest uncle. He had long noticed that Chun Pippi's mental state had some problems today. He frowned and asked, "According to the tone you used when you first warned me, I thought that you wanted all the remnants of the devil's doctrine to die. Why do I feel that it's not the case after listening to you today?" Chun Pippi was startled and said angrily, "Now that she has entered the academy and is a disciple of third sister, she is our academy's disciple and our niece. What does she have to do with the devil's doctrine? If that's the case, then it seems that I should kill you first." Ning Ke sneered and said, "Come in if you can." Chun Pippi said shamelessly, "Come out if you can." Sang Sang walked to the front of the cave with a tea tray and silently put down 2 cups of tea. Then she looked at the two separately. The two were a little embarrassed. They picked up the teacups and remained silent. Sang Sang shook her head and said, "You'd better change your words." Then she hesitated for a moment and looked at Ning Ke in the cave. She said, "I want to see her." Ning Ke knew that she wanted to see Tang Xiaodang and said, "Since she is a friend, of course you should go." After Sang Sang left, Chun Pippi suddenly asked, "You met Tang Xiaodang in the wilderness. Why is this little girl so stubborn?" Ning Ke began to tell his impression of Tang Xiaodang. Chun Pippi held the teacup and drank it tastelessly. He was silent for a long time when he thought of the little girl he met at the south gate of Chang'an City. Then he looked at the white clouds between the cliffs and frowned. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Since she is a member of the devil's doctrine, how can she be so cute?" Ning Ke never had the concept that Taoism and the devil's doctrine could not coexist. Now that he had joined the devil, he naturally felt this view to the extreme. He looked at Chun Pippi and said sarcastically, "Tao addict Yihong Yu is the daughter of Haotian Taoism. Then why is she so terrible in our eyes?" Chun Pippi murmured, "That makes sense." Ning Ke looked at his round face and suddenly thought of a possibility. After hesitating for a moment, he tentatively asked, "You watched Tang Xiaodang jump from the waterfall last night to this morning?" Chun Pippi nodded his head. Ning Ke gasped and said, "Although this little girl does have long black hair and can fight evenly with Yihong Yu, she is extremely powerful. Except for her overly powerful brother, she fits your imagination of a perfect partner in all aspects. But I have to remind you that she is a girl of the devil's doctrine. If the devil's doctrine was in its heyday, she could undoubtedly become the saintess of the devil's doctrine. But you are the precious young master of Haotian Taoism. As the saying goes, Taoism and the devil's doctrine cannot coexist. The academy can stand in the middle, but how can you stand?" Chun Pippi was in a trance and did not fully understand what Ning Ke said. He subconsciously replied with a sneer, "Who was laughing at my decadent ideas of Taoism and the devil?" Ning Ke sighed and said, "But have you ever thought that she is 1 generation younger than us, and you are her 12th uncle? Will it work? Will the teacher agree?" Chun Pippi finally understood what Ning Ke was talking about. His chubby body bounced up from the ground like an elastic fishball. He blushed and pointed at Ning Ke in the cave. He shouted, "Appreciation! Don't you know what appreciation is? Why is your brain full of such filthy things?" Ning Ke said, "Anger out of shame can't convince my opponent. I can only expose my true feelings." Chun Pippi said bitterly, "That little girl is only 14 or 15 years old. Can you not be such a beast?" Ning Ke sneered and said, "I think you are worse than a beast." Chun Pippi suddenly thought of something and looked at him with disdain. He said, "Do you think everyone in the world is like you? You could be a beast and lay your hands on your own handmaiden?" Ning Ke could tolerate other things, but he could not tolerate this. He shouted, "Damn fatty! If I can get out, I will teach you a lesson today." Chun Pippi sneered and said, "Come out if you can." Ning Ke said angrily, "Come out if you can." Suddenly, the two of them shut up at the same time and looked at the edge of the cliff platform with fear. They were very worried that Sang Sang would suddenly come back and hear this childish conversation again. The two of them looked at each other awkwardly and waved their hands to show that they did not mind. "I didn't walk the dog at night. I'm going to walk the dog." This is the 3rd chapter. The 4th chapter will definitely be very late after midnight. Don't stay up late. Let's read it tomorrow. Today is almost over. Don't keep the recommendation tickets. Give them to me, okay? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 389. Did we change the words just now? Yes, from come in and out to beasts and worse than beasts. Your little handmaiden won't laugh at us anymore, will she? That depends on whether she hears it or not. What kind of person is third sister? You're asking me? Am I asking the heaven and the earth? What do you want to ask? How did third sister enter the academy? When I was summoned to the 2nd floor of the academy with 6 A+ grades, third sister was already everyone's third sister. How would I know how she entered the academy? Can you not tell us about your glorious deeds every time we talk about the history of the academy? I'm really tired of hearing it. But I did get 6 A+ grades. Who could get that in so many years? I remember you gave up on 2 subjects during the academy entrance exam and took a blank piece of paper. Forget it. Ning Ke and Chun Pippi sat outside the cliff cave, gnawing on the corn cob cooked by Sang Sang in advance and chatting vaguely. But the process of chatting was as childish and boring as usual. Chun Pippi was in no mood to discuss the no-boundary spirit with Ning Ke because he was worried about whether the little girl from the Devil's Doctrine could escape from third sister's hands. After sitting at the entrance of the cliff cave for a while, he finally could not help but stand up and said seriously, "I forgot something important." Ning Ke waved his hand to show that he understood and said with a smile, "No matter you are in a hurry to go to the toilet or the headmaster wants to test your homework, whatever the reason, just go." Chun Pippi smiled awkwardly and was about to walk down the cliff platform when he suddenly thought of something. He took out an old book and threw it to Ning Quebec. Ning Ke took the old book and said in surprise, "Is this the 3rd book?" The headmaster prepared 3 books for him, and he had learned 2. He knew that he would see the 3rd book sooner or later, but he did not expect that he would get it so quickly and easily. "No," Chun Pippi said. "The scholar knew that you were imprisoned in the cliff cave and wanted to see you. He thought that the mountain was too high and wasted his time. So he asked me to bring you a book as a gift to relieve your boredom." Ning Ke looked at the cover of the book and asked in confusion, "Tea scripture?" Chun Pippi nodded and said, "Scholars say that tea can clear the mind. If you don't have the time or the mood to make tea, you can read the tea scripture. It can also have the same effect. I don't need to drink tea, and I don't need to read tea classics. My heart is already clear enough." Ning Ke said, "Otherwise, why do you think I haven't lost my temper?" Chun Pippi laughed awkwardly and turned to walk out of the cliff plateau. After a while, he stopped again, wiped the sweat off his face, and walked back to the cliff cave. He said helplessly, "Second brother asked me to inform you of another thing, so I'll leave after you finish it." Ning Ke was slightly startled and asked, "What is it?" Chun Pippi said, "A few days ago, a sword master from the South Jin Kingdom submitted a letter of challenge to the academy." Ning Ke said with a smile, "It turns out that there are people who are not afraid of death in the world." Chun Pippi said, "That great sword master is young, but he is very powerful." Even Chun Pippi praised the strength of the South Jin Kingdom, which surprised Ning Quebec. He asked, "Is there another grand cultivator in the knowing destiny state?" Chun Pippi shook his head and said, "They are not weeds by the roadside. How can we meet one every time we want?" Ning Ke thought, "There are at least 5 or 6 powerhouses in the knowing destiny state in the front yard of the back mountain of the academy, including you. Doesn't that mean you are weeds or wildflowers by the roadside?" Chun Pippi said, "That great sword master from the South Jin Kingdom has been immersed in the upper see-through state for many years, so he must have seen the threshold of the knowing destiny state. He is probably similar to Prince Longqing when he first came to Chang'an." Ning Ke always felt that there was something strange about this matter. The upper see-through state was indeed a very powerful existence in the eyes of the world's cultivators. But when Prince Longqing came to Chang, and with a dazzling reputation, Chun Pippi still did not pay attention to him. Why did he pay so much attention to this great sword master from the South Jin Kingdom? More importantly, that great sword master was only in the upper see-through state. Why did he dare to submit a letter of challenge to the academy? He suddenly thought of a possibility and asked tentatively, "Did that great sword master from the South Jin Kingdom not leave after he was defeated?" Chun Pippi shook his head and said, "He was not defeated, so of course he did not leave." Ning Ke said, "Even if second brother did not fight, you could have easily sent that person away. What happened?" Chun Pippi looked at him and said, "That sword master from the South Jin Kingdom clearly stated that he wanted to challenge you." Ning Ke thought that it was as he expected. He pointed at the bedding and futon in the cliff cave and said, "I am a prisoner now." Chun Pippi comforted him and said, "You will be able to get out one day." Ning Ke walked into the cave and pulled out a bamboo chair. He leaned comfortably on the back of the chair and said, "I don't care. Since the academy is not afraid of losing face and no one to accept the challenge, then let that great sword master from the South Jin Kingdom stand guard at the entrance of the academy. It is not spring and the weather is not warm yet. I think it will not wait too long." Chun Pippi said, "It is not that we do not want to fight, but we cannot." Ning Ke was slightly surprised. He sat up straight and asked why. "Because that sword master from the South Jin Kingdom will not fight with us at all." Chun Pippi said helplessly, "Once he sensed that we were about to appear, he would shout idiotic words about sacrificing himself to the sword at the entrance of the academy, as if he would commit suicide at any time." Ning Ke said mercilessly, "If he wants to commit suicide, then so be it. Why do you care so much? At most, ask the handyman teachers in the front yard to prepare a few more buckets of water and wash the blood away." Chun Pippi said, "Because his background is a little tricky, his family and a few professors in the academy are old friends. He only sat at the entrance of the academy and was extremely respectful and sincere. He said that he would wait for you to finish your cultivation and come out of seclusion before seeking a fair fight. We really have no reason to drive him away." Ning Ke said, "Why does he have to fight with me?" Chun Pippi said sympathetically, "Perhaps because everyone knows that you are the weakest among us." Ning Ke had long become numb to such descriptions. He sighed and said, "In the end, the weakest one was pushed to the front by you guys to fight to the death." Suddenly, he thought of Chun Pippi's words and asked, "Who is this sword master?" Chun Pippi reminded him, "He is from the South Jin Kingdom." Ning Ke suddenly thought of that dazzling golden name, and his expression suddenly became solemn. He looked at Chun Pippi in disbelief and asked, "The most powerful person in the world, the Sage of Sword Lu Bai, actually wants to challenge me?" Chun Pippi was stunned and then said angrily, "Do you think this is possible?" Ning Ke came to his senses and said awkwardly, "It seems that it is indeed not possible. Although that great sword master from the South Jin Kingdom is not the Sage of Sword, he is indeed related to Lu Bai. Therefore, since he has lowered himself, we can't do anything even if we are disgusted and annoyed as if we had eaten a fly. If second brother fights today, how can we fight with Lu Bai in the future?" Chun Pippi said, "That person is Lu Yiqing, the youngest brother of Lu Bai. It is said that he has been cultivating in the private house of the Lu family and has not entered the sword garret. Therefore, he is not well known. It was not until he entered Chang and alone that the world knew that the Liu family has another young powerhouse in sword Taoism. Ning Ke asked, "Now I'm locked in the cliff cave by my teacher and can't get out in a short time. Why did second brother ask you to tell me about this?" Liu Yiqing has been sitting at the gate of the academy for a whole 7 days. Chen Pippi looked at him and said, "He sits on the futon, drinking the water provided by the academy and eating his own dry food. He meditates all day long just to wait for you to come out of seclusion." Looking at his behavior, it would not be surprising if he waited at the gate of the academy for a year. Liu Yiqing's attitude is respectful but extremely persistent. No matter how the professors in the front yard persuade him, he only smiled slightly and refused to leave or enter the academy to wait. Although the futon he is sitting on is not blocking the path of the students, sitting at the gate of the academy every day is like blocking the gate of the academy in the eyes of others. People passing by can't help but talk about him. This matter has already spread to Chang, and I'm afraid it will soon spread to the whole world. Chen Pippi said, "Second brother is a little annoyed, so he asked me to tell you that a powerhouse has come to challenge you outside the academy. He hopes that you can remove the inhibition and come out of the cave as soon as possible." Ning Ke asked after a moment of silence, "What is Liu Yiqing's state and strength?" Chen Pippi knew that he was not asking about states like see-through and knowing destiny, but specific combat strength. However, he had rarely fought in his life and could not make an accurate evaluation. Suddenly, he remembered that second brother had sighed with emotion when he stood on the mountainside and looked at the South Jin swordsman sitting cross-legged at the gate of the academy. Second brother said that if Liu Yiqing does not lose his lucky chance, he will most likely catch up to his brother in the future. Ning Ke was stunned and then fell into silence again. He did not expect such a wonderful story to happen outside the academy on the other side of the mountain after being imprisoned in the cliff cave for more than 20 days. He also did not expect that after defeating Monk Guan Hai from the Lang Temple and killing Master Dao Shi from the Xiankong Temple, his cultivation in the human realm had not ended. Someone still came to challenge him, and that person was the younger brother of Liu Bai, the Sage of Sword, the strongest in the world. The real problem was that even second brother thought that he had the potential to become the second Sage of Sword. Ning Ke thought for a long time and suddenly laughed. He lay back on the cool bamboo chair and took out a silk handkerchief from his sleeve and gently covered his face. Chen Pippi asked in confusion, "What are you doing?" Ning Ke's voice sounded a little dull through the silk handkerchief. "I want to sleep." Chen Pippi said, "Someone is blocking the gate of the academy and wants to challenge you. How can you sleep? Just like what we have said these days, he can't come in and I can't go out. No matter how strong that person from the South Jin Kingdom is, he can't hurt me. What I have to worry about? Aren't you worried that the Academy's reputation will be damaged? Will the Academy's reputation be destroyed just because I am sleeping? If I really can't bear it anymore, I believe that second brother will not care about Liu Bai's face and will definitely kill that guy." Ning Ke turned his body and lay comfortably in the cave, leaving his back to Chen Pippi. He said, "Help me pass a message to Liu Yiqing. Tell him that Mr. 13 is now cultivating in martial arts and talisman and will need at least 3 months of seclusion. If he can bear the smell of horse dung in the meadow, the dust from the carriage wheels, and the low temperature at night, he can wait as long as he wants. I don't care even if the flowers wilt. There's no 5th chapter. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to sleep. I will still have 4 chapters tomorrow. It would be wonderful if the plot could be completed smoothly. Good night, everyone." To be continued. If you like this work, please come a Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 390. Liu Yiqing was a silent and gentle young man. His silence and gentleness did not mean that he was not proud, but he hid his pride well under his silent and gentle appearance. Just like a few years ago when he obeyed his eldest brother's order to leave the Liu mansion and join the sword garret incognito. No matter how indifferent or hostile his fellow disciples were, he was still gentle. Because his eldest brother was the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, he had enough right to be proud. But he did not need to show his pride to the disciples of the sword Garrett. But facing the academy in the south of Chong, and his silence and gentleness were more sincere, because he knew very well that he had no right to be proud here. Out of respect for the academy, he chose to sit far away from the main gate of the academy. Instead, he sat at a secluded side gate at the back of the mountain. Chun Pippi's description of the so-called humiliation of the academy to Ning Ke in the cliff cave was naturally exaggerated. But a sword master from the South Jin Kingdom had challenged the academy and sat quietly to wait for someone to break out of seclusion. This had caused a lot of discussion and attracted many people's attention. It was early spring, and the morning breeze was still chilly. Lu Yiqing slowly opened his eyes and woke up from meditation. He calmly looked at the surrounding onlookers with complicated expressions. Most of the people surrounding the South Jin Kingdom Great Sword Master were students of the academy's front yard. However, as he sat at the academy's gate for a longer time, the news spread to Chong and aroused more people's curiosity. Some curious onlookers even came together to see what he looked like. The side gate was pushed open with a squeak. Professor Huang, he walked out and stood beside the futon. He looked up at the gloomy sky and suddenly sighed. He said, "I invited you to the academy for your brother's sake, but you refused. Now you have attracted so many onlookers. Don't you think this is ridiculous and boring? Or did you already decide to use this method to humiliate the academy when you came to Chang'an?" "I dare not." Lu Yiqing stood up from the futon and bowed. He said, "I dare not to be rude to the academy. I only came under orders. If I leave without a fight with Mr. 13, I will not know how to answer my brother when I return to the South Jin Kingdom. Since Mr. 13 is in seclusion, I will wait for him here." Huang, he looked at the young sword master from South Jin Kingdom. It was as if he was looking at the arrogant man from many years ago. Although the young man in front of him looked gentle, there seemed to be a stubbornness in him that would not give up until he reached his goal. If you want to wait, then wait. If you're thirsty, there's water in the yard, but the academy won't provide you with food. If you finish your rations, go back to Chang'an. Lu Yiqing said, "Don't worry, sir. I brought a lot of food." He sat there from dawn to dusk. Many disciples of the academy made a special trip to the side door to see Lu Yiqing. When they saw that there was nothing special about the young powerhouse from the South Jin Kingdom, sitting motionlessly on the futon, they felt bored and dispersed. As for those nosy people from Chong, and who came to watch the fun, they surrounded Lu Yiqing not far away, pointing at him and whispering. Some even argued fiercely because of different opinions. The secluded and quiet side door was not quiet at all. Great Sword Master should be a very powerful cultivator, right? This is the first time I've seen a living cultivator. I heard that he's already in the upper see-through state, about the same level as Prince Longqing. So what? I heard that the student from the second floor of the academy he challenged this time shot Prince Longqing to death in the wilderness. How can he be defeated by him? Speaking of which, this person from the South Jin Kingdom is not as cowardly and useless as other people from the South Jin Kingdom. He actually has the guts to block the gate of the academy. I just don't understand. The gate of the academy has already been blocked by this guy. Why are the people in the academy still allowing him to be so arrogant and not chasing him away? First of all, this person from the South Jin Kingdom is sitting at the side door. Look, other than us, who else would pass by here? Secondly, since the student from the second floor that he challenged is in seclusion, it's naturally not convenient for the other people in the academy to attack. If the people in the academy attack, wouldn't it be degrading? That makes sense. How long do you think this person from the South Jin Kingdom can last here? 10 days to half a month? Who knows? I only know that when the student from the second floor of the academy breaks out of seclusion, this person from the South Jin Kingdom will not sit there anymore. He will immediately lose miserably and scram back to the South Jin Kingdom. Naturally, the Tang Empire was the most powerful country in the world. The second most powerful country was the South Jin Kingdom. With the support of the West Hill Divine Palace, the South Jin Kingdom dominated the South. They had always been dissatisfied with the Tang Empire. However, the people of the Tang Empire looked at the South Jin Kingdom as if they were always in second place. They were vigilant and even mocked them. It was a rare occasion for the Tangs to have a young powerhouse from the South Jin Kingdom challenge the Academy. It was also a rare opportunity to teach the people from the South Jin Kingdom who was the real boss after years of peace. As for whether this person from the South Jin Kingdom could defeat the student from the second floor of the Academy, the Tangs did not know who the student from the second floor of the Academy was, nor did they know how powerful he was. However, they had never thought that the person from the Academy would lose this duel. This had nothing to do with pride and arrogance. It was just a certain aura that flowed in the blood of the Tangs. Before the battle began, they would never think about what would happen if they lost. This was because the goal of the battle was to win. There were no other thoughts other than winning. Day after day, the people of Chang, and who came to watch the battle, repeated their curiosity, whispered, and argued intensely. In the end, they came to a consensus that this young powerhouse from the South Jin Kingdom might look arrogant, but he was destined to be no match for the person from the Academy. He would definitely lose miserably. Day after day, Lu Yiqing sat outside the side door of the Academy and received countless gazes. He felt the curiosity and disdain in their eyes, and listened to the discussions of the Tangs and the people from the South Jin Kingdom. However, his expression was still calm, as if he did not care. A wildflower bloomed under the stone steps in front of the side door, signifying that spring had finally come to the world. Lu Yiqing looked at the little flower, and a smile suddenly appeared on his calm face. The smile on his face was gentle, but the smile in his heart was slightly cold. As the younger brother of the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, and the most outstanding disciple of the younger generation in the Sword Garret of the South Jin Kingdom, he had the right to be proud and confident. Even when facing the Academy, he could only bury his pride and confidence deep in his heart. However, how could he not be angry when he heard the discussions of the Tang people? Mr. 13 of the Academy, Ning Ke. Before Lu Yiqing left the Sword Garret, the Sage of Sword, Liu Bai, had warned him that he could not lose to anyone other than the first, second, and 12th disciples of the Academy. The meaning of this sentence was clear. In Liu Bai's eyes, other than Mr. First, Mr. Second of the Academy, and Mr. 12th, whose reputation had been circulating in Haotian Taoism for many years, no one else should be a match for Lu Yiqing. Lu Yiqing was very clear about Ning Ke's current state and strength. How could a person who had just entered the see-through state in the wilderness be a match for his sword? Many cultivation sects in the world still thought of Ning Ke at this stage. In the beginning, they did not understand why the headmaster was willing to accept such a wastrel as his disciple. Later, when Ning Ke defeated Prince Longqing, Monk Guanhai from the Lang Temple, and Master Dao Shi from the Xiankong Temple, the cultivation world began to think about the real reason why the headmaster accepted Ning Ke as his disciple. However, no one thought that Ning Ke was very strong. Now, the detailed process of the 3 battles that had really established Ning Ke's position in the cultivation world had long become the object of study for the various cultivation sects, including every detail. And the more they studied, the more they felt that Ning Ke had won these 3 battles more because of the peerless weapons provided by the Academy and the unpredictable luck. For example, the strange iron arrows in the wilderness, and the battle between Ning Ke and Master Dao Shi in the pure land of lotus flowers on the streets of Chang'an. It was obvious that he had received some external help. Many people in the cultivation world suspected that the young fat man standing beside Ning Ke at that time was most likely the legendary Mr. 12th of the Academy, or that Mr. 12th had secretly helped Master Dao Shi, which was why Master Dao Shi was defeated. However, no one had evidence. After all, it was Mr. 12th of the Academy, and he had such a legendary background. No one dared to stand in front of the stage and raise questions. Not raising questions did not mean that there were no doubts. At least until now, no one thought that Ning Ke was really stronger than Prince Longqing. On the journey from the South Jin Kingdom to Chang, and Lu Yiqing learned of the failure of monk Guanhai of the Lang Temple. He began to be wary of Ning Ke's means of talisman Taoism. After arriving in Chang, and he carefully studied Ning Kei's 3 battles. In the end, he came to a conclusion. Other than what the cultivation sect said, he also noticed a very important point. This Mr. 13, who represented the Academy in entering the human realm, was very opportunistic in battle. Lu Yiqing had been practicing swordsmanship since he was born. He cultivated diligently and constantly polished his spirit and willpower. He had suffered countless hardships before he had today's status in the sword garret. He had always hated those who only knew how to take shortcuts or those who were very lucky. And in his view, the guy called Ning Kei was only lucky to be accepted by the headmaster of the academy, which was why he had such glory. Therefore, he had no enmity towards the academy, but he was hostile towards Ning Quebec, and he firmly believed that Ning Kei was no match for him. There were 2 other reasons for Lu Yiqing's endless enmity towards Ning Quebec. The first reason was that even he himself did not realize. That was when the 2nd floor of the academy opened, he was still practicing hard in the sword school of the Lu family's old residence. He felt extremely regretful about this and felt that he had missed the most precious opportunity. And this opportunity that he had helplessly missed finally fell on Ning Quebec, sitting on the futon outside the side door of the academy. He looked at the hateful Tangs not far away. He silently thought that if it were not for his eldest brother's strict orders to let him seize this opportunity to sharpen his spirit and try to be accepted by the headmaster of the academy as a student, he would have definitely killed Ning Kei after he broke through. An old woman wearing a blue gown and holding a bamboo broom walked out from the side door. She walked to the side of the praying mat and looked at Lu Yiqing's face from the side. She slowly asked, "Are you unhappy?" The old woman was so close to Lu Yiqing that he could not help but feel a little shocked. It was said that there were hidden talents in the academy. Could it be that this old woman was also an extraordinary sublime being? But he did not sense any fluctuations of psyche power from the old woman. Lu Yiqing calmly replied, "There is nothing to be unhappy about. It's good that you are not unhappy." The old woman in the blue robe walked to the stone steps with her body hunched and began to sweep the ground. Lu Yiqing frowned slightly. He thought that she had clearly seen him sitting here. Why was she not more careful when sweeping and even stirred up so much dust? The old woman seemed to have sensed what he was thinking. She stopped sweeping and held the bamboo broom for a moment to catch her breath. She looked at him and said, "Someone asked me to bring you a message." Lu Yiqing's expression turned serious, and he asked, "Please speak." The old woman narrowed her eyes and looked at the gloomy sky. She seemed to be trying to recall what the messenger had said. After a long time, she finally remembered and said, "The person you want to challenge is now cultivating in seclusion in the cliff cave." "What is he cultivating?" "I remember. He's trying to practice both talisman and martial arts." The old woman continued. "He said that if you cannot go to the toilet in the academy and can endure the smell of urine and the dust, as well as the chilly early spring, then wait for him for 3 months. Lu Yiqing was silent. When the headmaster returned to the academy, Mr. 13 and Ning Kei began to practice in seclusion. This matter was already known by now. However, when he heard the old woman pass the message on behalf of Ning Kei, he then realized that Ning Kei actually wanted him to wait for 3 months. He was even angrier when he heard that Ning Kei was practicing both talisman and martial arts. It was true that cultivators often needed to practice in seclusion to understand Tao, but they needed to do so for as long as 3 months. They were either grand cultivators or at the critical moment of breaking through the realm. Ning Kei's state was so low. Of course, he was not one of those grand cultivators who needed to seek Tao from heaven. Furthermore, he had just entered the see-through state in the wilderness. Was he going to enter the knowing destiny state now? In Lu Yiqing's understanding of the cultivation world, such a thing had never happened before. As for practicing both talisman and martial arts, it sounded more like a joke. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was all fake. Ning Kei's seclusion was also fake. It was just a shameless excuse to avoid battle. Lu Yiqing revealed a look of disdain and said, "If Ning Kei does not have the confidence to enter the human realm on behalf of the academy, just say it. How dare he use such an excuse? He is a disgrace to the academy and the headmaster. After the old woman in the blue robe passed the message, she ignored him and continued to sweep the floor with her hunched body. However, when she swept the floor, the bamboo broom in her hand was waved higher, as if she felt the breath of early spring and remembered the beauty of her youth decades ago. She actually wanted to dance. The dust mixed with the gravel was waved high and then slowly fell. The bamboo broom was waved by the old woman, and it was obvious that she was deliberately sweeping the dust down the stone steps. Liu Yiqing was covered in dust and looked extremely embarrassed. His face had turned pale from anger. He looked at the sweeping old woman and said sternly, "No wonder Ning Ke asked you to pass the message. So this is the so-called bearing the dust. Is this the way the academy treats its guests?" The old woman looked at him expressionlessly and said, "I have never heard of such a guest in the world, sitting at the door of the host's house and refusing to enter no matter how we invite him." Liu Yiqing frowned slightly. The old woman looked at him and said, "Even if you want to wait for Ning Ke to break through, you can wait in the academy, you can wait in Chang, and you can even write a letter directly from the sword garret of South Jin Kingdom. But you insist on sitting at the door of the academy. In fact, everyone knows why you do this. But the elders in the academy and little Huang here are friends with Liu Bai in the early years, so they can't say anything. In the past 100 years, I have seen many young cultivators who have cultivated for many years in an attempt to become famous. They're all like you, thinking that the soul of the academy lies in the headmaster of the academy. The other disciples are just lucky to be under the headmaster of the academy and have lucky chances that you can't get no matter how hard you work. I know you want to shock the world and become famous, but you have chosen the wrong place and the wrong person. You don't like others to take advantage of others, but you keep staring at the weakest Ning Ke on the second floor. Isn't this opportunistic? Once you start taking advantage of others, the sword style that you inherited from Liu Bai will lose its fundamental reason. Because your brother Liu Bai has never been a person who takes advantage of others. And because of this, he is the most powerful person in the world." The old woman gently brushed the blue robe on her and said, "If you can't even eat dust, how can you endure suffering and boredom? If you can't even endure suffering and boredom, what right do you have to use the academy as a footnote for your reputation? If you can't even understand such a thing, how can you become famous?" Liu Yiqing listened to the old woman's words and remained silent. His face became paler and paler, and cold sweat poured down his back, wetting his clothes and even the futon under him. After a moment, he sat up straight and pressed his hands forward on the ground. He bowed his head and made a disciple's bow. He said sincerely, "Thank you for enlightening me." The old woman walked to his side and swept the dust and rubbish mixed with few fallen leaves into the basket. She said, "You don't have to thank me. I am not here to remind you of anything. It's just that you have been sitting outside the side door of the academy for 7 days, and I have 7 days where I can't sweep the floor. If you really want to wait for that guy for 3 months, I have to come and sweep for 3 months. I hate to see rubbish on the floor the most." The old woman stooped and walked into the side door. Liu Yiqing looked back at the tightly closed side door of the academy. He felt that the old woman's last words about not wanting to see rubbish on the floor were a mockery of him. But he was not angry. Instead, he was thoughtful. If Ning Ke had been outside the side door of the academy, he would certainly have recognized who the old woman in the blue robe was. The students of the academy often saw an old woman holding a bamboo broom and sweeping every corner of the academy with a stooped body. She had long become a page of the academy's legend. Because the old woman was not the steward responsible for the cleaning work, but the only female honorary professor of the academy. She was a big shot in the academy's mathematics department that no one dared to provoke. When Ning Ke entered the academy, he got the only A+ in mathematics. The question was set by eldest brother. In fact, eldest brother had set a total of 5 questions, and the old woman finally chose the question of cutting peach blossoms. And at this time, when he was pondering in seclusion between the cliffs of the Cliff Mountain, he also thought of this question. The first chapter is here. It's 5,000 words, so it's a bit late. The second chapter will be updated before 11. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Achidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 391. Ning Ke, who was imprisoned in the cliff cave, had to get rid of the strong inhibition left by the headmaster of the academy if he wanted to break out. He did not expect to defeat the headmaster of the academy, nor was he willing to destroy the great spirit in his body. Therefore, he could only choose the second method, to transform the great spirit so that it could live in harmony with the chi of heaven and earth and nature, or even become one and completely erase the difference between the two. According to the book, The Origin of the Breath of Heaven and Earth, the natural chi of heaven and earth was the same thing as the true chi and great spirit in the body of the devil's doctrine cultivators. However, with the passage of time and the difference in substance, they gradually had completely different characteristics. Ning Ke thought that he could go back and use the snow mountain and ocean of chi, the passageway, and the whirlpool to directly decompose the great spirit in his body into the smallest particles and turn it into its original appearance. Then he could use other methods to smear the colors of nature to disguise it as the aura of heaven and earth. However, when he really started to try, he found that he could not even take the first step of this method. After countless painful failures, he finally believed that no one could be the enemy of such a great existence as time. After pondering for several nights, he suddenly realized that the two books given to him by the headmaster of the academy were not necessarily for two different methods, but should be related to each other. Therefore, he tried to use the no-boundary spirit of the academy to simulate the great spirit into the chi of heaven and earth and nature. Just as Chun Pippi once said, the no-boundary spirit of the academy was the fire, the stove was his body, and the great spirit was the food in the pot. What he needed to do was to use the no-boundary spirit of the academy to control the fire and use his wisdom, experience, and knowledge as the seasoning to fry the great spirit in his body into a plate of fragrant chi of heaven and earth. After some calculation and deduction, Ning Ke felt that this method should be feasible and immediately began to prepare. The target he chose to simulate was the water talisman that he was most familiar with and the first to understand. He used the fu paper to condense the purest water and carefully observed it for a long time. He carefully analyzed the characteristics of the aura and the smallest differences, and then wrote it down in his notes. At the same time, he did not forget to cultivate the no-boundary spirit of the academy. When he was sure that he had completely mastered all the characteristics and taste of the chi of heaven and earth condensed by the water talisman and had mastered the essence of the no-boundary spirit of the academy, he officially began the transformation. As dusk shrouded the mountain, he sat cross-legged on the praying mat and slowly closed his eyes. When Xiao Wu entered the cave, he slowly opened his eyes and stood up from the cattail hassock. The psyche power entered his body and flowed slowly. Ning Ke looked at the whirlpool in his abdomen and silently sensed the Great Spirit. When he finally confirmed that the Great Spirit in his body had turned into the chi of heaven and earth with the characteristics of water talismans under the disguise of the no-boundary spirit, he could not help but reveal a look of surprise. After a while, Ning Ke wiped the blood from the corner of his lips and silently looked at the flying dust particles at the entrance of the cliff cave. He recalled the situation when he tried to pass through the entrance, but triggered the inhibition and fell into deep thought. Under the disguise of the no-boundary spirit of the academy, the great spirit in his body had changed its appearance and become one of the aura of heaven and earth. Why did it still trigger the inhibition of the cliff cave? How did the simple aura left by the headmaster discover that the great spirit flowing in his body was still the great spirit and not the chi of heaven and earth in the cool breeze and flowing clouds? The morning light shone through the blue sky on the other side of the precipice. Ning Ke squinted because of the piercing light. Suddenly, he thought of something. There was no completely colorless light in the world, not even a completely monochromatic light. At least it was like that in the world he was in now. Even if it could not be seen with the naked eye, those invisible waves still had their own colors. Just like the seemingly holy Haotian divine light, it was actually composed of many colors of light. Similarly, in nature, there was no completely monochromatic chi of heaven and earth. The chi of heaven and earth in the cool breeze and flowing clouds, green trees and white stones seemed to be different. In fact, since the creation of the world, the chi of heaven and earth had gone through hundreds of millions of years of precipitation and integration. Although they still retained their respective characteristics, they had already taken on other auras. Only the chi of heaven and earth condensed and summoned by talisman paper or tactical arrays was absolutely pure. Ning Ke walked to the cliff cave and took out a piece of talisman paper after a moment of contemplation. He touched it with his psyche power and made it condense into a fireball, which floated out of the cave with the wind. According to his previous thinking, the weak fireball contained the chi of heaven and earth. Then it should not be discovered by the aura of the headmaster, and he could easily enter and exit the cave. There was a light sizzling sound. The weak fireball floated to the entrance of the cliff cave and suddenly died out. The inhibition at the cliff cave suddenly appeared and then disappeared. Ning Ke looked at it silently, and his face turned a little pale. It turned out that the inhibition left by the headmaster not only did not allow the Great Spirit to pass through, but also any unnatural aura of heaven and earth. In other words, as long as it was a cultivator, even if the psyche power in his sense of perception could only cause a very small fluctuation of the chi of heaven and earth, it would not be able to pass through the cliff cave. Ning Ke thought of the situation of his senior brothers and sisters who came to visit him a few days ago. He noticed that none of them entered the cliff cave or even stretched out their hands towards the line. Only then did he realize that his senior brothers and sisters had probably already known about the incredible nature of the inhibition. He suddenly thought of something and called Sang Sang into the cave. He stared at the little handmaiden who could enter and leave freely, and felt that his thoughts were even more confused. If the headmaster's inhibition was targeted at the unnatural psyche power, talisman power, and the Devil's Doctrine cultivator's genuine chi, then Sang Sang should have left some Taoist aura in her body when she cultivated with the divine priest of light. Why did the inhibition have no effect on her? Ning Ke stopped thinking about it and continued to study how to break through the restriction. After confirming the true meaning of the inhibition in the cliff cave, he realized that if he wanted to simulate the Great Spirit in his body into the chi of heaven and earth in the natural world, then he could not simulate just one of them. He needed to simulate countless kinds of chi of heaven and earth, regardless of the quantity, but all of them must be present. The problem was that there were countless kinds of chi of heaven and earth in the natural world. Even if he had the no-boundary spirit of the Academy and could observe the characteristics of various kinds of chi with talismans, how could he simulate all of them with the Great Spirit? The Great Spirit in his body was like a basket of vegetables. No matter how many seasonings were put in, no matter how precise the fire was, could he stir-fry this basket of vegetables into more than 300 dishes? And there was a more critical problem. If I give you a handful of vegetables, can you cook a bowl of roasted pork? Ning Ke looked at Sang Sang and asked. Sang Sang thought for a while and said, "Of course not. But yesterday Mr. First brought a few pounds of fresh pork. If you want to eat roasted pork, I can cook it for you later." Ning Ke did not have too much time to be depressed. He immediately threw himself into studying and solving the problem. The problem left by the headmaster of the academy was too difficult. It seemed that there were only 3 correct answers, but no matter which one it was, it required a lot of courage. Some of the answers could be seen clearly, but found that there was an extremely complicated code attached to the answer. With his current state and ability, it was impossible for him to solve the code, because the code vaguely pointed to the origin of the world and the composition of nature. It was also at this time that he thought of the old woman in the blue robe in the front yard of the academy. In a mathematics question of the academy's entrance exam, Xie Qingyun first used the method of exhaustion and got an almost infinite number. However, Ning Ke directly got the result at one glance, so he got the only A+. Ning Ke was very good at studying, or rather, he was good at taking exams. Exams like mathematics were often a showcase of one's talent. Therefore, he had always looked down on his peers who did not know how to use formulas and answer questions. They only knew how to do calculations. But now he did not have a ready-made formula, nor could he find any skills, so he could only pick up the stupid method that he used to look down on and try to solve it by force. Solving by force was exhaustion. The so-called exhaustion was complete induction, trying the answers one by one. As long as he had enough time and patience, he would eventually find the only correct code. Ninkei tried to solve the inhibition of the cliff cave by force, but there was a small difference from solving the code. This was because he needed to find the characteristics of countless kinds of chi of heaven and earth, and to model the great spirit in his body into them. This was equivalent to finding countless passwords and then combining them together. Only in this way could he see the final answer. This method was very violent and beautiful, but in fact it was very clumsy and helpless. The word exhaustion was a characteristic of this method. However, from another perspective, it could also be understood as the solver had exhausted all of his wisdom and could not find any other way to solve the problem. That was why he used this method in an extremely sad and sorrowful manner. In the following days, Ninkei began to use the exhaustion method to analyze and simulate the chi of heaven and earth. He did not know how many kinds of chi there were, but he did not rush to touch the inhibition, because he was very clear that this must be an extremely complicated and even magnificent project. Not to mention 3 months, even 300 years would not be enough to see the result. But he still kept trying, because he had only given himself 3 months. If he did not put in his best efforts in these 3 months, he would have a lot of regrets when he remembered that he had destroyed the Great Spirit in the past. Ninkei became more and more silent in the cliff cave. He did not have time to comb his hair, which scattered behind him, making him look a little depressed. His face became more and more haggard, but the luster in his eyes became brighter and brighter. Chun Pippi often came to visit him. Looking at him now, he could not bear to let him torture himself like this, nor could he bear to let him give up halfway. So he just stayed silent like him. Other senior brothers and senior sisters also came to visit and gave all the herbs and food they collected to Sang Sang, so that she could cook them at any time to keep up the spirit of youngest brother. Tang Xiaodang cultivated with Yu Lian, but she was still miserable. She held Song Song's hand and complained when she could occasionally play on the cliff. But when she looked at Ninkei in the cave, she felt a little ashamed. Just like that, the days passed day by day, and spring gradually deepened. Chapter 3. Try to get out before 1. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 392. Ninkei, who was in the cliff cave, had no chance to get close to the new wildflowers in the fields. Fortunately, he could often see bouquets of flowers in the cave. Sang Sang would return to Chong, and every once in a while to talk to her parents in the scholar's mansion. But she refused to stay overnight and would rush back to the academy on the same day. She would pick flowers on the way and bring them to Ning Quebec. Ninkei was imprisoned in the cliff cave and could only learn about what happened outside the academy from Sang Sang and Shinpipi. And these things seemed to have something to do with him. The Buddhism sect and the Yueluan kingdom were shocked and indignant that the sadhu from the Xiankong temple was killed by him in the morning street. However, this was a direct challenge, so the disciples of the Buddhism sect could only remain silent. The Yueluan kingdom, perhaps because of Aunt Kunimati who had lost her beloved son, was overwhelmed by anger. The monarch wrote a letter and sent it to Chong, in which he asked the Tang Emperor to punish the murderer. The Tang Empire had never been provoked like this. The emperor was furious and summoned the envoy of Yueluan kingdom to scold the Yueluan kingdom, calling the Yueluan kingdom an idiot. Finally, seeing that the Yueluan kingdom had lost a future master and the Tang Empire was very proud, His Majesty did not send troops to teach the Yueluan kingdom. Instead, he issued an imperial edict that from that day on, the White Tower Temple of Yueluan kingdom could not preach in the Tang Empire, and the sadhu who were scattered in the countryside must leave the country immediately, or they would be severely punished. Such a strong response naturally shocked the Buddhism sect. The abbot of Lang Temple wrote a letter to Master Huang Yang in Chang, and confirming that the Tang Empire was only targeting the Yueluan Kingdom and the White Tower Temple, and that its attitude towards the Buddhism sect had not changed. The Academy would still send people to attend the Yulan Hungary Ghost Festival. The West Hill Divine Palace remained silent in this incident. When the aftermath of this incident was about to fade, the West Hill Divine Palace suddenly sent a delegation to Chang'an. The delegation was led by the great divine priest of Revelation. There were more than 100 people in it, including the 3 priests of the Revelation Department and the Judicial Department, as well as the personal secretary of the Hierarch Lord. Compared to the delegation that sent Prince Long Qing to the Tang Empire 2 years ago, this delegation was much larger in both scale and rank. The Great Divine Priest of Revelation was one of the 3 Great Divine Priests of the West Hill Divine Palace. In the world illuminated by Hao Yian's divine light, especially in countries other than the Tang Empire, his status was even higher than that of a king. For a bigwig like the Great Divine Priest of Revelation, even if he left the Peach Mountain and left the West Hill, he would usually quietly cultivate in the secular world. He would rarely appear in front of the world, let alone visit other countries. The destination of the Great Divine Priest of Revelation this time was the Tang Empire, which was the only country in the world that dared to talk to the West Hill on an equal footing. It immediately caused a tidal wave of shock in the world. The royal families of the South Jin Kingdom, Yueluan Kingdom, Yin Kingdom, Song Kingdom, and Great River Kingdom were all nervously guessing the real intention of the West Hill Divine Palace. The West Hill Divine Palace commanded Haotian Taoism and had hundreds of millions of believers in the world. Even though it was the South School of Haotian Taoism that handled the specific religious affairs in the Tang Empire, it still held a very high position in the hearts of the Tang Empire's people. Therefore, the imperial court of the Tang Empire would naturally not treat it like the Yueluan Kingdom. Since receiving the request of the West Hill Divine Palace for a visit, the imperial court of the Tang Empire began to make careful and detailed preparations. For example, the reception standards, when His Majesty would meet the Great Divine Priest, and what kind of etiquette should be used when they met. It was naturally impossible for His Majesty to kneel like other monarchs in the world, and it seemed inappropriate for the Great Divine Priest of Revelation to kneel to His Majesty. In short, there were countless details that needed to be taken care of. The imperial court of the Tang Empire did not have to guess the intention of the Great Divine Priest of Revelation's visit to Chang'an. Even though this made many people nervous and confused, the people in Chang were very clear about the purpose of this Great Divine Priest of Revelation's visit. As spring gradually deepened, the Great Divine Priest of Revelation and his delegation finally arrived in Chang'an City. After going through a series of complicated and meticulous procedures, the West Hill delegation completed the visit on the surface, but they did not intend to leave. The Great Divine Priest of Revelation lived in the Southern Gate Temple. The reason for this was that the real matter of the West Hill delegation's visit to Chang'an City had not been completed. To be more precise, the person that the Great Divine Priest of Revelation was looking for had not been found yet. The emperor and ministers of the Tang Empire did not care about this matter at all, because the key to this matter was the Academy. The person that the Great Divine Priest of Revelation was looking for was also in the Academy. She was serving her young master in the cliff cave. One day, the Great Divine Priest of Revelation suddenly appeared in the mansion of Zheng Jing, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library Pavilion. Even though Zheng Jing was a first-grade Grand Secretary of the Tang Empire, he was so excited that he almost fainted when he suddenly found the Great Divine Priest of West Hill, who was highly respected by the believers of Haotian, in front of him. One day later, the priest of the Revelation Department, Cheng Lishua, tentatively asked Li Qingshan, the nation master of the Tang Empire, if the Great Divine Priest of Revelation wanted to enter the Academy to visit the headmaster of the Academy. After thinking for a while, Li Qingshan agreed to ask him in the Academy. Half a day later, Li Qingshan brought back some bad news for the West Hill delegation. The headmaster of the Academy said that if the Great Divine Priest of Revelation wanted to visit the Academy, it would not be a problem. After all, Li Qingshan had been here before. However, if you wanted to do that thing, then it would be meaningless even if you saw me. Because whether the little girl went to West Hill or not, her parents could not control it, and neither could I. The person who could control it would not know when he would come out. If the West Hill delegation just stayed in Chang and City, especially the great divine priest of Revelation, as time went by, the countries would become more and more anxious, and things would become a little awkward. Fortunately, at this time, the long-arranged event finally happened in the northern wilderness according to the original plan. It successfully attracted everyone's attention, and they forgot about the West Hill delegation in Chang and City. Under the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace, the allied forces of the countries in the Central Plains went deep into the wilderness and met with the cavalry of the Left King's palace in the grassland. They launched an attack on the Desolate Man's tribe that had just moved south from the cold region of the far north for a year. The main force to attack the Desolate Man's tribe was the cavalry of the Left King's palace and the army of the Yen Kingdom. The most powerful northeast border military of the Tang Empire was strangely responsible for bringing up the rear and providing logistics. When the cavalry of a tribe in the Left King's palace rebelled because of the uneven distribution of resources, the northeast border military of the Tang Empire, which had been silent for a long time, rushed hundreds of miles and used a night to suppress the rebellion. Then, all the men of the rebellious tribe lost their heads. The battle with the Desolate Man was very bloody and tragic. However, when people saw the battle report, they found that the most bloody and tragic scenes still happened in the hands of General Xiaohou. This great General Xiaohou, who was known for his ruthlessness and strength, continued to seize military exploits one after another, winning wave after wave of praise from the great Tang court. According to the judgment of many people in the court, when great General Xiaohou retired after autumn as promised, he would definitely receive the highest honor. Liu Yiqing had been sitting on the futon outside the side door of the academy for more than 2 months. He was covered in dust and looked haggard, but his eyes were extremely bright. After talking to the old woman in the blue robe of the academy, he sat on the futon and meditated for 3 days and 3 nights. He did not drink or eat, but he did not choose to leave. Instead, he became more and more silent. It was also when he opened his eyes again that his eyes became brighter, like a sharp sword that had been washed by spring water, rippling with a sense of clarity. Even when he was meditating, his state actually increased. Many people in the cultivation world were watching the side door of the academy. Many people already knew that Ning Kei's retreat was to cultivate talisman and martial arts at the same time. No one had heard of what it meant to cultivate talisman and martial arts at the same time, and few people believed that anyone could do it. They could easily tell that Ning Kei finally realized that his state was too weak after a series of victories, so he chose to cultivate in seclusion. In the West Hill Divine Kingdom, because the great divine priest of Revelation had left with the diplomatic corps, and because of the rebellion of the divine priest of Light, which had been buried in the darkest depths of the scriptures, Peach Mountain seemed a little lonely. And the Jishou Abbey, which was far away in the deep mountains, was already used to this kind of loneliness. Therefore, when a soft sounded in the hut where the 7 tomes of arcane was enshrined, the sound was so clear. The sun, hand scroll, in the middle of a piece of paper, still had the lonely name of the Tao addict, Yi Hong Yu. But a name in the inconspicuous corner had disappeared without a trace. A middle-aged Taoist priest stood in front of the sun, hand scroll with a somewhat complicated expression. How Ian's divine light shone on the world, and the sun, hand scroll recorded the names and states of all the cultivators in the world. When a cultivator's name completely disappeared, there were only 3 possibilities. That cultivator had already crossed the iron threshold and broken through the 5 states. Or that cultivator had died and everything was for naught. Or someone had used an inhibition to block the way of heaven from looking down. But who could have such an incredible ability? Of course it was the headmaster. The middle-aged Taoist priest sighed with emotion and remained silent. For example, they wanted to see who was more powerful between the students of the 2nd floor of the academy and the brother of the Sage of Sword. Or they wanted to see Mr. 13 of the academy beaten like a dog. In short, Many people looked forward to the day when Ning Ke broke out of seclusion. The West Hill Diplomatic Corps in Chong, and the great divine priest of Revelation who was meditating in the Southern Gate Temple were also waiting for him to come out. But no one thought that Ning Ke might not come out in this lifetime. It was already late in the spring. The wisteria in the roofed corridor on the cliff plateau was lush and green, blocking all the sunlight, making the entrance of the cave extremely quiet. Light purple flowers were in full bloom between the branches, extremely beautiful. Ning Ke walked to the entrance of the cliff cave and casually tied up his loose hair. He leaned against the stone wall and looked at the greenery in front of him and the green fields beyond the clouds in the distance. He said, "Only a destitute and desperate person with no passion for life can torture himself like this. So this is what it means to exhaust oneself." Sang Sang walked to him and looked at the hanging purple flowers in the roof corridor. She thought that her daily care had finally paid off. She said happily, "I heard that the fruits will be more beautiful in autumn. Those fruits are long, like beans, and the stew is delicious." Ning Ke said, "Autumn? Then we definitely won't be able to see it." Sang Sang suddenly froze and asked in surprise, "Young master, can you go out now?" Ning Ke said with a smile, "The meat has been stewed. The only thing left is to add the beans and stew it. It's almost ready. Today's 3 chapters have cost me 11,000 yuan. But I have to continue writing. There must be more, but it will definitely be early in the morning. Don't wait for me. Go to sleep. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 393. Today, the main dish of lunch in the cliff cave was braised pork. Ning Ke squatted at the entrance of the cave, holding a bowl of rice and chewing the greasy fat in his mouth. He looked at the clear view of the precipice and asked vaguely. Chun Pippi used to come and snatch food whenever he smelled the fragrance of the meat. But recently, he came less often than before. Even if he came, he would leave in a hurry after a short while. What on earth is he busy with? Sang Sang pushed aside the braised pork in the pot with a spatula, leaving only the gravy soaking in the white rice. She took the bowl and squatted down beside him. After thinking for a while, she said, "I don't know either. But the day before yesterday, Tang Xiaodang mentioned that he often helped her solve her problems in cultivation recently." Ning Ke was startled and remembered the conversation about the beast 2 months ago. He sneered and said, "Solve her cultivation problems? My teacher asked him to help me, not to help that little girl. Taoism and the devil's doctrine are always the same. Let me ask you, who was the beast in the back of the mountain today?" Sang Sang didn't understand what he was talking about. Ning Ke suddenly looked at her and asked, "I heard that the great divine priest of Revelation has been to the Grand Secretary's mansion." Sang Sang nodded and continued eating. Ning Ke asked again, "So you didn't go back to the Grand Secretary's mansion this time?" Sang Sang lowered her head and hummed. Ning Ke looked at her slightly black forehead and asked in a low voice, "What do you think about this? Look at the Divine Hall's behavior. They really take you, the successor of the Divine Priest of Light, seriously. I have never heard of any successor of the Divine Priest being so valued by the Divine Hall. They even sent a great Divine Priest to pick you up." Sang Sang said, "Young master, what do you think about this?" Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, "Although I don't like the West Hill Divine Palace and have never imagined that you would really become the great Divine Priest of Light, I still think it is ridiculous. But if there is such a chance, I have to admit that it is very glorious and powerful. It will be a pity to miss it." Sang Sang suddenly put down the rice bowl in her hand and looked at him seriously and said, "Now it seems that we should think more about how to break through than these small things. The stupid bird finally flew into the forest first, and the stupid man finally got his reward. After racking his brains for dozens of days, Ning Ke once again showed incredible perseverance and patience in the face of a desperate situation. Just like when he walked out of Min Mountain, climbed the old library, and comprehended talismans in the storm, he completed the seemingly impossible task and successfully mastered all the essential characteristics of the aura of heaven and earth. This also meant that he could finally change the great spirit in his body into the natural chi of heaven and earth, so that when he walked out of the cliff cave, he would not trigger the inhibitions set by the headmaster. He was confident that he could do it. It was also because of this confirmation that when he failed again and was shaken back into the cliff cave by the restriction, his face became extremely pale and a rare emotion similar to despair appeared on his face. His judgment was right. The aura left by the headmaster at the entrance of the cliff cave did not react to the great spirit in his body. However, to his surprise, when his right foot was about to step over the line, his body suddenly hit an invisible but indestructible wall. Why was that? In the depths of the cliff cave, Ninkei hugged his head and curled up between his knees. It took him a long time to suppress the despair and thoughts of abandoning himself in his heart, and he began to think seriously again. Suddenly, he understood, but he was really in despair. The aura left by the headmaster at the entrance of the cliff cave would trigger the inhibition once it sensed the great spirit or the unnatural chi of heaven and earth. It would simply summon the endless chi of heaven and earth between the cliffs, and then condense into a violent sea, swallowing anyone who tried to break through. And when no one with the unnatural chi of heaven and earth tried to pass through the inhibition, the aura left by the headmaster would become a wall, a fence. Compared to the violent sea of chi of heaven and earth, the aura did not seem that scary, but it was, after all, the aura left by the headmaster. How could it be that easy to pass through? Perhaps it was really easy. Even with Ninkei's cultivation at the lower level of the see-through state, he could still pass it. This was because he had the Great Spirit and he had learned the method of cultivating chi recorded at the end of the book, Examination of the Origin. As long as he could cultivate the Great Spirit in his body to a majestic level, or even a little more vigorous, he could probably break through the wall left by the headmaster. In other words, he was just short of one breath, the Great Spirit. However, the more powerful the Great Spirit in his body, the more dangerous it would be to trigger the inhibition when passing through the cliff cave. Once the inhibition was triggered, the sea of chi of heaven and earth would become more violent. He could indeed turn all the Great Spirit in his body into the natural chi of heaven and earth, but it had already exhausted him for 3 months, not to mention a larger amount of Great Spirit. He really did not have the energy and determination to repeat the process that he had repeated countless times. It was precisely because of this that Ninkei had stopped cultivating the Great Spirit in the past 2 months. And he vaguely understood that if he really continued cultivating the Great Spirit, he would not only be tortured like now, but he might even end up like his youngest uncle. This possibility made him vigilant and even afraid. This was a contradiction. This was the last question that the headmaster had given him. To see the light in a hopeless situation, but there was a great risk hidden in the light. At such a time, what would you choose? Would you continue to wait in silence, waiting for the sky to become brighter, or the sky to never brighten again? Or would you gamble with your life, bravely or crazily take another step towards the sky? Sitting on the cliff cave floor, Ninkei painfully thought for a long time, but he did not come up with an answer. Instead, his mood became more and more depressed, and he muttered to himself, "Is there no end?" He did not know who he was asking this question to, the headmaster or God. His voice was a little louder, but it was still the same 4 words. "Is there no end?" He suddenly stood up, grabbed the bamboo chair beside him, and forcefully threw it against the cliff cave wall. With a crisp sound, the bamboo chair broke into pieces and became a pile of rubbish. He had been imprisoned in the cliff cave for 3 whole months, seeing hope, then disappointment, and then despair. He kept repeating this process, which was boring and tiresome. At this moment, he finally broke down. "Is there no end?" Ninkei shouted angrily, grabbed everything he could grab, and forcefully threw them against the cliff wall. Bamboo chair, soup urn, water basin, brush, ink paper, inkstone, and even the 2 books. It seemed that this was the only way he could vent the extremely depressed and unresigned sullenness in his heart. Everything in the cliff cave was smashed by him. A bunch of wildflowers that Sang Sang had picked from the waterfall on the other side of the mountain yesterday was scattered on the ground by him. He fell down among the flowers, looking lonely with his head down, looking extremely pitiful, like a lost child who could never find his way home. Suddenly, he remembered his first encounter with the headmaster of the academy. It was on the balcony of the building of pines and cranes, and it ended with an unreasonable blow from the headmaster of the academy with a short stick. Ning-Ke still did not understand why a bigwig like the headmaster of the academy would lose his composure like a street vendor, stamping with rage and hitting his own student with a stick. At this time, he finally understood how the headmaster of the academy felt at that time. It was also that blow from the headmaster of the academy that reminded him of the real principles of the academy. The academy taught its students that if they were sure that their actions were correct after careful consideration, then they should not be afraid or evasive when encountering difficulties. Instead, they should move forward bravely and use all means to uphold their own principles. This was the principle of the academy. In other words, when the enemy was too powerful to be reasoned with, then there was no need to reason with it. Ning-Ke raised his head and looked at the exit of the cliff. At this moment, he did not think of any predecessor, because the only predecessor on this path was youngest uncle, and youngest uncle had finally walked down the path of destruction. He thought of the powerhouses of Haotian Taoism, starting from the Tao Adiki Hongyu to the great divine priest on the Peach Mountain, from the world wayfarer Yisu who carried a wooden sword on his back, to the legendary Abbey Dean of the Jisho Abbey who wore a fluttering indigo robe, until finally his eyes fell on the clear blue sky outside the cliff. I will continue to cultivate the Great Spirit, and I will try again. I don't care if I will trigger the inhibitions set by you, teacher, and I don't care what I might encounter in the future. He murmured, because I don't want to stay here anymore. I want to go out. Fuck you. Sang was washing dishes in the hut when she heard the sound of things falling in the cliff cave. She quickly wiped her hands and was about to go and have a look when she heard these words again. She could not help but feel slightly surprised. She thought to herself, "You are locked in the cave for seclusion. How did that antidote of the Buddhism sect in the Yueluan kingdom offend you?" She walked to the entrance of the cliff cave and was about to go in when she saw the mess inside. Ning-Ke was sitting on the ground with his legs crossed, looking peaceful, like a statue, sitting on the ancient ruins. In the past 2 months, Ning-Ke had been trying to transform the Great Spirit, but he had never cultivated it. The vortex deep in his lower abdomen was as calm as a small pond. At this moment, the Great Spirit seemed to have clearly sensed his determination and slowly flowed. Perhaps because he had been lonely for too long, when the Great Spirit flowed, it completely ignored Ning-Ke's psyche power and suddenly began to speed up faster and faster. In the end, the vortex in Ning-Ke's abdomen began to shake and spin almost crazily. The calm small pond suddenly became violent, as if it was about to roll up a storm. The chi of heaven and earth in the cliff cave came from all directions like a slanting wind and drizzle, and then desperately poured into his body. Ning-Ke could clearly feel the current situation and could not help but feel a little frightened. He thought that if he allowed so much chi of heaven and earth to pour into his body, he would very likely explode and die, just like those who were selected as disciples by the devil's doctrine and died tragically at the first stage. For a moment, he wanted to stop the violent vortex in his abdomen, but he did not know whether it was because he could not stop or because he was so eager to regain his freedom that he wanted to risk his life to bear the consequences of this sudden situation. Anyway, he did not sit down, feeling the chi of heaven and earth continuously pouring into his body. Ning-Ke's face turned slightly pale and his body trembled slightly. But he still sat firmly on the ground with his legs crossed and did not move at all. The breeze between the cliffs seemed to have sensed the abnormality in the cliff cave and swept over with a whistling sound. It turned into a gale with wind and gravel, passing through the cliffside huts and roof corridors and directly pouring into the cave. Sang held the stone wall at the entrance of the cave and struggled to stabilize her body. She looked inside worriedly and wanted to shout loudly to wake Ning-Ke up, but in such a strong mountain wind, she could not open her mouth at all. Ning Ke closed his eyes and sat quietly in the cave. His mind was completely focused on the soaring great spirit in his body, and he did not know what was happening outside at all. His clothes fluttered like a battle flag in the wilderness. The mountain wind whistled in the cliff cave, and the pieces of the bamboo chair, brush, and inkstone that he had smashed earlier directly floated up and circled around his body in the air. Occasionally, they would hit the wall of the cave and become even finer pieces. The stone wall of the cliff cave looked extremely hard, but under the intensive impact, like a storm, the outermost layer of the stone wall gradually cracked, and many stone chips rustled and fell. On one of the stone walls, for vague words appeared. The chi of heaven and earth between the cliffs entered the cliff cave with the wind and kept pouring into Ninkei's body. In an instant, it filled all the acupoints in his snow mountain and ocean of chi. Then it poured into his body and kept filling and occupying, unwilling to give up any place, even the smallest acupoint. Ninkei felt that his body was swelling, as if he had become a bag full of wine. He even felt that his hair and eyelashes were filled with the chi of heaven and earth. The whirlpool in his abdomen became bigger and bigger, and the speed of the edge naturally became faster and faster. He even faintly felt the pain of his internal organs being cut open. He knew that if he allowed this situation to continue, he would explode and die from the continuous influx of the chi of heaven and earth. But he still did not stop and just silently muttered the 4 words, waiting for the arrival of the last moment. Just when the chi of heaven and earth completely filled every part of his body and began to invade his real body, in a very short moment, Ninkei used his strong willpower to resist the nausea caused by the shaking of his sense of perception and the extremely terrible pain, and let his psyche power fall on the whirlpool in his body. For many years, he had been constantly meditating because he wanted to cultivate. Whether he could cultivate or not, he meditated to cultivate psyche power. He meditated when he was sleeping, when he was in a daze, when he was writing, when he was brewing medicine for Sang Sang. He meditated all the time. He had paid a perseverance and desire that ordinary cultivators could not bear. So after he could cultivate, he had an abundant psyche power that ordinary cultivators could not imagine. So when the chi of heaven and earth had poured into his sense of perception, squeezing out the last bit of space and dispersing almost all of his psyche power, he could still maintain the last bit of clarity and psyche power. When the psyche power fell, a light suddenly flashed in Ninkei's already muddled sense of perception. The light was like lightning, and it woke him up instantly. He thought of the simple aura left by the headmaster at the cliff cave. That simple aura could summon all the chi of heaven and earth between the cliffs, and then compress and condense it into a square rain sea, isolating the cliff cave from the outside world. Since the chi of heaven and earth could be compressed, then the chi of heaven and earth in his body could also be compressed. The 3 months that he was imprisoned in the cliff cave turned into countless images that quickly flashed in front of his eyes. The inhibition at the entrance of the cliff cave, the violent sea of chi of heaven and earth, the forbidden book called Origin of Chi of Heaven and Earth, the last chi cultivation skill in the forbidden book, the nameless book recorded the Academy's no-boundary spirit, and countless kinds of chi of heaven and earth. These fragments of information kept colliding and combining, deconstructing and reconstructing. It turned out that to be free, one needed freedom. Ninkei no longer worried about whether his body would explode, nor did he care about the dizziness and pain. He just calmly looked at the whirlpool in his body, letting it freely spin and expand at a high speed. The most critical moment came. The majestic chi of heaven and earth occupied Ninkei's body. At this moment, a wonderful scene happened. The rapidly expanding Great Spirit whirlpool that was about to break through space seemed to have become a little thin because of the extreme expansion. Although it would soon be filled by new chi of heaven and earth, at that moment, the number of the whirlpool itself seemed to be unable to resist the gravity of the center of the whirlpool, and there was a slight tremble. Then, the whirlpool began to shrink. Although the speed of the whirlpool's contraction was very slow at the beginning, it accelerated very quickly. In a split second, it had actually shrunk to only half of its original size. This was no longer a contraction, but a collapse. Before Ning Ke had time to react, the majestic Great Spirit whirlpool had completely collapsed into the center of the whirlpool, turning into a small black dot. The Great Spirit in his body flowed back with the collapse of the whirlpool, leaving every bone, every nail, every strand of hair, and every eyelash all pouring into that small dot. There was only silence in the empty space. There was no sound, no movement. There was only a drop of water-like liquid suspended in the center of the space. The drop of liquid had no color, crystal clear, and was as pure as water. Ning Ke looked at the drop of water, and his mind moved slightly. The transparent drop of water suddenly began to shine with golden light. It was extremely beautiful. Every ray of light contained the Great Spirit. Wisps of them flowed through his body like a spring breeze and drizzle, moisturizing every part of the dry land. The cliff cave returned to peace. There was no more storm of chi of heaven and earth. The mountain wind that swept from between the cliffs gradually stopped. The pieces of the bamboo chair, brush, and inkstone fell on the ground. Only the bunch of wildflowers that Sang Sang had picked was torn into pieces by the wind, and now the petals were relatively light. They slowly danced with the breeze around Ning Ke, like countless butterflies. Ning Ke slowly opened his eyes. The petals fell on his body. The cliff cave was full of wreckage. Ning Ke picked off the petals on his body and walked to the cave wall that had a crumbling outer wall. There were 4 words on the stone wall, drawn like a sword, full of unyielding pride. It must have been written by youngest uncle when he was imprisoned in the cliff cave, but somehow it was covered by the stone wall. Ning Ke had also said these 4 words before he decided to take this gamble. At this time, looking at the 4 words left by youngest uncle on the cave wall, Ning Ke finally understood what the key to breaking the inhibition of the cliff cave was when he recalled his emotions when he said these 4 words. The breath that he had been lacking was not the chi of heaven and earth, nor the Great Spirit, but the breath of unwillingness towards the heaven because of his yearning for freedom. Looking at the 4 words on the stone wall, he seemed to see the angry and unwilling youngest uncle, and could not help but laugh happily. He walked out of the cliff cave and gently hugged Sang Sang. Then he walked to the edge of the cliff, looking at the cliffs, the flowing clouds, the bottomless abyss, and the blue sky in front of him. He put his hands behind his waist and shouted, "Fuck you. I'm already in a state of idiocy to write a chapter on canvassing votes at this time. If you like this work, please come a Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 394. In front of the precipice was the sky, but there was still no echo. Ning Ke's shout disappeared not far from the cliff. It did not linger for 3 years. Looking at the beautiful scenery of the precipice, Ning Ke suddenly turned around and walked into the cliff cave. But when he was about to enter the cave, he subconsciously stopped. Sang Sang said, "If you want to have a look, go in and have a look. I will accompany you." Ning Ke nodded and walked in with her again. He had been imprisoned in this cliff cave for 3 months, and his spirit and willpower had been severely tested. During those nights of despair and contemplation, he had thought countless times that if he could break through the inhibition and get out of this cliff cave, he would immediately take Sang Sang to escape from the cliff plateau and never come back to this cliff cave for the rest of his life. However, when he really broke out of the cave and walked back to the cliff cave, he suddenly found that his mood was so calm. The stone walls in the cave that made him extremely tired and depressed seemed to have a lot more natural beauty now, and the scene in front of him was completely different from the past. Only those who had experienced wind and rain could see the rainbow. Those who had experienced wind and rain suddenly looked up and saw the rainbow outside the cliff plateau, which must be the most beautiful. From the outside into the cliff cave, it was a bit dark. It was the first time for Ning Ke to walk into the cave from the outside in 3 months, so he was not used to it. He stretched out his right index finger. The extremely pure Great Spirit was slowly released from the water droplet in his abdomen. It passed through the passageway and entered the ocean of chi and mountain of snow. It flowed from the meridians to the fingers of his arm and then turned into a round white flame. Sang Sang looked at this scene in a daze and subconsciously stretched out her slender finger to the side of Ning Kei's index finger. She slightly moved her mind, and then a white flame appeared. The two flames instantly lit up the cliff cave as if it were daytime. There was no difference between the two except that the flame between Song Song's fingers was unusually solemn and sacred. The two looked at the flame on each other's fingertips and smiled. Ning Kei asked, "This is Hao Yian's divine light?" Sang Sang nodded. Just like the theory in the Forbidden Book, most of the aura of heaven and earth in the world came from the sun and the sky. No matter how many different auras it became under the carving of time, it was the same thing in the origin. There was no essential difference between the Great Spirit and the divine light summoned by the divine skill. However, time was the greatest existence in the world after all. It was still unimaginable to erase its traces on the Great Spirit and eventually make the Great Spirit and Hao Yian divine light identical in substance and form. Koharan had done it back then. He had cultivated the Great Spirit to the extreme, so he no longer needed to simulate all kinds of chi of heaven and earth. Instead, he cultivated all the chi of heaven and earth in his body into the purest existence. When all the colors of light fused together, it became transparent and colorless sunlight. All the chi of heaven and earth fused together and became transparent and colorless sunlight. The sunlight was the Hao Yian divine light. The only difference between the Great Spirit of the Peak Realm and the Hao Yian divine light was that it lacked the majestic and sacred aura given by the Way of Heaven. However, the Great Spirit had more aura than the Hao Yian divine light. The divine light belonged to Hao Yian and was only given to the immortal cultivators. The Great Spirit, on the other hand, belonged to the cultivators themselves and had their own pride and integrity. Other than these subtle but irreconcilable differences, the Great Spirit of the Peak Realm and the Hao Yian divine light were essentially the same. The Hao Yian divine light could transform into countless kinds of chi of heaven and earth. Therefore, when the powerhouses of the West Hill Divine Palace cultivated the divine skills to the peak, they could often understand all kinds of skills. The same was true for the Great Spirit. That was why the youngest uncle Koharan could understand all kinds of skills when he understood the divine skills of the West Hill. He did not even need to learn. He only needed to take a look, and he could understand the mystery of the West Hill divine skills. He carved thousands of sword marks on the stone walls of the Devil's Doctrine and built a confinement array with the Great Spirit in the sword marks. Ning Kei looked at the round ball of light on his finger and understood everything. Of course, he had not cultivated the Great Spirit to the terrifying state that the youngest uncle had in the past. However, he had understood this principle and could do some of it. After 3 months of isolation in the cliff cave, he finally found the answer in order to solve the problem left by the headmaster of the academy. In the process, he also gained a lot of benefits. In addition to the changes in the Great Spirit, the most important thing was that he seemed to see some of the most basic structures of the Hao Yian world. He even vaguely saw the nirvana that he had never dreamed of. These were all extremely precious treasures, and these treasures would continue to support and help him in his long cultivation career in the future, so that he could go further. Because he was clear about this, Ning Kei had a deeper understanding of the words that the second brother had told him twice about the connection between fate and perseverance. At this moment, Ning Kei seemed to be proud, but he did not look proud at all. He walked to the peeling stone wall and knelt on the ground to make a disciple's bow, just like how he did in the bottom of the Daming Lake, and when he saw the youngest uncle's handwriting at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. It took the youngest uncle 3 years to leave the cliff cave, but it only took him 3 months. However, he was very clear that it was not because his talent and wisdom was far better than the youngest uncle's, but because the youngest uncle used his peerless talent and wisdom to figure out this principle, and then the headmaster of the academy left his experience to him. A person who stood on the shoulders of a giant could never really be taller than the giant. He, who inherited the youngest uncle's legacy, was just a student. When he could have his own understanding of the world beyond the wisdom and experience of his teachers and build a new system, then he could become a real giant. Only then could he return to the cliff cave and proudly tell the youngest uncle that he was no longer a student. After the bow, Ninkei stood up and walked out of the cliff cave to the cliff. Thinking of his teacher and students, he naturally thought of the headmaster of the academy. At this moment, he thought back to his 3 months of imprisonment. Of course, he understood the headmaster of the academy's good intentions. The 2 books that the headmaster of the academy gave him not only hid the essence of the youngest uncle's wisdom, but also taught him 2 ways to break out of the cave, and also taught him 2 things: patience and courage. The eldest brother walked to the cliff platform and looked at Ninkei standing on the edge of the cliff. He smiled gently and said slowly, "So this is why the headmaster asked me to come and have a look." Ninkei bowed respectfully and said, "Eldest brother, you have worked hard these days." The eldest brother took out the old book from his waist and handed it to Quebec. Ninkei was stunned and then suddenly understood. Looking at the old book in front of him, he said unbelievably, "This is the 3rd book that the headmaster wants me to read?" The eldest brother said yes. Ninkei was so shocked that he couldn't say anything. He didn't expect that the 3rd book that the headmaster taught him could only be read after he broke out of the cave. What really shocked him was that the 3rd book turned out to be the Tomes of Arcane. My parent flight was delayed, so I was a little unsure about the schedule. I happened to have a very small but very important description that I didn't find a good method in words, so I wrote it very slowly. I will update 1 chapter first and then continue writing. The 2nd chapter will be updated very late at night, but I will try to write more. It will definitely be updated today. I advise you not to stay up late like me and read it tomorrow. I have no choice. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. That you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.